Okay, so we're going to move right into our speaker for the day today, Dr. Laurie Fox, who is one of the horticultural associates here at AREC. She has a long resume, including multiple publications, a book, a number of things, but just in brief, has a PhD in horticulture from, I'm going to slaughter this despite her coaching me, Wageningen. I don't know why I keep missing one of those syllables. Wageningen University in the Netherlands. And speaking of clearing the air, that's what her dissertation focused on, plants clearing the air. She also has a BS and MS in horticulture from NC State. She's been here at AREC for a number of areas where her research focuses primarily on water quality and sustainable landscapes. So that's why on your schedule, you have 16 and 17 mentioned. Remember, you've already done 17 once, but you'll see that Laurie's going to tie chapters 16 and 17 together with some of her talk today. So, Dr. Laurie Fox.
Laurie, with the comment about the class was too fast-paced because I'm one of those people that talks really fast, so I usually say fasten your seatbelt, and I wave my hands a lot. But anyway, welcome back to the Research Center, or AREC as we fondly call it, and I am on your program today for both landscape design and water quality. So we've got two different presentations. So what we'll do is we'll zip through one, take a break, we'll zip through the other, and then hopefully by then it'll warm up just a few more degrees outside, so that we can go walk and talk and look at two gardens. We're going to go to the Sustainable Practices Garden here at the back of the classroom, and the rain garden, which is just up off the front corner of the building, so that we can again kind of look and pull things together. So, and I'm pretty casual about my presentation, so if you have questions or comments along the way, please feel free. All right, make sure this works. So, relative to landscape design, the way that I look at landscape design is putting together a puzzle. Okay, everybody's kind of knows how to do it, even if you haven't ever done it before. But it's all these pieces that are scattered and disjointed and unorganized, and you have to pull them all together, organize them, and finally connect them and put them together in a way that creates the picture. And that's exactly how you approach landscape design. It is a process, part detective, part site analysis, it's a lot of different things that you have to pull together. All right, but you got to start somewhere. And so generally you need to start with the planning and mapping stage. And so what you have to do is, there's three things you got to do with landscape design. You've got to look at the site, you have to look at the user and what they want to use the site for, and you have to look at the plant component and put all of these things together. To solve whatever problem, create whatever vision it is that you're trying to do. But there's some things you have to think about, or you have to advise your client to think about, and that would be things like, what is the end goal here? Is it to have the best yard on the block? Is it to be an example? Is it to just have a wonderful secret garden that you can, retreat to from the rest of the world? What is the end goal here? What is your timeline looking like? And I'll tell you right now, HGTV, they lie. That's not how it happens in the real world. Seriously. Unless you have a closet full of minions and an unlimited budget, which I don't, but anyway. So what is your timeline? And you may have to do things in phases. And then budget drives a lot of your decisions relative to landscaping. Developing resource lists, who's who, where are you going to find stuff, where, number one list this time of the year, where are all the Master Gardener plant sales? Because you can get some really fabulous plants, some really great deals if, you need to do that. Because budget might be tight or something. And then we start looking at the specific site maps and how to gather analysis information. So, all right, so with base maps, you need to have a base map, and we'll show some graphics in a minute. And then what you do is once you kind of get your base map, then you make copies of it. and each copy may be a different focus of information that you kind of then layer. But you can't put everything all on one map, and you don't want to keep having to like redraw things or anything. So once you get your original base map, make copies and then start putting stuff on it. So your first base map, you need things that you can't change or are going to have to deal with in one way or another. So things like, where are the property lines? You don't want to be landscaping somebody else's property, right? Where are easements, if there are any? You do this great design, you install it, and the next thing you know, Dominion Power is coming through your property to do something, or the city is digging up something, or whatever. And then setbacks and things like that, if there are any. Where is north? That's important because that helps you calculate your sun and shade angles, which is important for then deciding where plants will be going. Buildings, of course, ones that exist and ones that might be coming. Are you putting addition on? Are you adding a shed or a garage or an extra parking spot in the driveway? So what's there now, what might be coming? Scale is important, but that kind of comes later in the process when you really start getting down into the nitty-gritty of what is the square footage of this bed? How many plants am I going to need? How much compost do I have to calculate, for whatever it is. But you kind of need to decide on your scale too. So, does 1 inch equal 10 feet or what? Septic and sewer lines are very important, again, because oftentimes you do not want to dig or plant around those. Walkways and driveways, again, what's existing and what might be coming, because this influences traffic flow through the site. How are you getting from one part of the site to the other, whether you're walking or driving? And especially with foot traffic, there's all kinds of types of pathways. Main pathways used frequently are probably like concrete or something like that. Something you may use occasionally. Maybe stepping stones. So, but how are you moving from one space to another, both pedestrian and vehicular? We're talking residents most of the time. We're on the house, you have doors, windows, and specific rooms, because I'm the first to admit I'm a fair weather gardener. I don't like to be outside gardening when it's cold, but that doesn't mean I don't want to enjoy my garden. So if I'm looking out my kitchen window, or looking out my bedroom window, what am I looking at? And the back door, what is part of the landscape is that letting me out into? And how am I appreciating those things from inside the house until it's warm enough to go out and garden? And that's really important too, because, and I didn't really realize this, I know this conceptually because I've had design training and whatnot, until my mom came to live with me when she was terminally ill. And so she was mobilely challenged, so she spent an awful lot of time in her bedroom. And so what was outside those bedroom windows was so important to her because she was a gardener. And that's kind of where I got my love of gardening. So, you have to think about those things. It's not only, the outside looking around, it's the inside looking out. Other things, water hydrants, fire hydrants, utility meters, utility lines, phone poles and lines. It's not just what's about in your horizontal view, it's what's up. And most times people forget to look up. And that is critically important, especially if you're putting in trees. And then HVACs, you want to hide them maybe, but you also, might need to figure out how to space plants around them. You can't put things right up against your HVAC equipment. It needs air circulation. So things like that. And then, this last one just happened this past week. We've got MetroNet coming through our neighborhood, putting in underground cables for some new cable system or something. And so, of course, they have to have this utility mark everything. And so right through my beautiful flower beds, I've now got, yellow gas lines or, blues and greens and you name it. Understanding where these things are is important. Here we go. So your base map, you can get a copy, from your city. If you want something like this, you may already have a copy, from when you purchased the home. but it defines your property lines and gives you, some information and what you don't need all this stuff necessarily, but you can trace this on a piece of paper and have your base map without all the extra stuff. And that's one way to do it. You can create your own. If you have somebody, kid, husband, whatever, or spouse, excuse me, I don't need to be sexist there. Get out there with the measuring tape and mark everything and measure it out. And if you don't have somebody to put on the other end of the measuring tape, get a handy dandy screwdriver, because there's usually a hole or something in the end of the tape, and you put the screwdriver in, and then you get the other end and make your notes. So it doesn't have to be anything complicated, but it has to be enough that you know what's where in relation to each other, and you can then put information on the map. So you're the one that has to understand this. So it has to be done in a way that you're comfortable with. And then what you do is you take this, and this is what you then make multiple copies of, because then you start layering your information, okay? So, where's north? Are there existing plants? There's a ditch back here. You got fencing, views. We'll talk about all this stuff. Which room is which kind of thing, all of that stuff. So once you get a base map that you're interested in using, and then what you do is start your analysis. And this is just your information gathering, okay? And so you can do it in a number of different ways. But what you're trying to do is gather as much information as possible that could impact the decisions and choices you make relative to the design. You can do it through being on site and observing. And especially in maybe different times of the day is important, or if you've got the luxury of time, maybe different parts of the season or parts of the year. One of the sayings is, if you move into a house, you need to live in it at least a year before you do anything in the landscape, just to kind of see what's what, okay? So anyway, so observation. You can also rely on your own experiences. If this is your property you're dealing with, maybe sort of the history of what's been going on there and that sort of thing. Or if you're answering questions for a client or something, you have some experience. Don't discount, what you know and that experience. And then, of course, you can also utilize different resources. And we'll talk about those in a little while. So on base map 1, or copy 1 of base map 1, I should say. Things that you might want to note. Again, things that you're going to either have to deal with one way or the other. Rocks, slopes, erosion, compaction, things like that about the site. Are there boulders? We don't tend to have too many of those here in Hampton Roads, but you never know. I was watching HGTV the other day, and the couple went to look at a house to buy, and somebody had created this elaborate fountain right at the front of the house. It just kind of looked like it had been plopped down from outer space. But obviously, it was something that they had to make note of and deal with. And then erosion is a big deal, and there's obvious signs of that. So that's something to make note of, because part of the design might involve stabilizing or managing runoff somehow. And then compaction. And especially if this is a new site or even an old site, maybe somebody's been kind of parking off to the side of the driveway for a while, and that area is compacted now, and that's maybe why the grass isn't doing so well as the rest of the yard or something. But those are things to note that might need to be dealt with in the design. Stormwater pathway, and we'll talk a lot more about this in the water quality presentation later, but you got to know where the water's coming from. And sometimes it's not always generated on that piece of property. Sometimes it's coming from an adjacent property. But you got to know where it's coming from, how it's moving through the site, and where it's exiting the site, if it is. And if there's something that you might need to be dealing with in that regard. You don't want to do a design, put in a bed, and you've neglected the stormwater issue, and now it's just washing away everything that you've done. So things like that. Do you have any restrictions in the area? I know a lot of us here have waterfront property in Hampton Roads, and there are restrictions like the Chesapeake Bay Protection Area or Preservation Act, or whichever way you call it. But that's that setback from the water that tells you what you can and can't do in that area. no cutting down vegetation, no bulkheads or hardening of the shorelines without permits and documentation, no filling in, things like that. Otherwise, a neighbor will tattle on you, and then you're going to get, a knock on the door and probably a fine, from whoever in the city enforces it. Desirable and undesirable features. Does your neighbor, is she like the absolute best gardener in the world with this absolutely gorgeous garden that you just love to look at? Well, yeah, sure. Then you don't want to put a screen up on that side of the property. You want to borrow that view and use it and enhance your own landscape design and steal and make your landscape feel more expansive from the views. But then again, maybe on the other side, there's some nosy neighbors and you need some screening up. Maybe they put in a hot tub and like to skinny dip, and that's something you don't want to see. Or maybe you're the one who's skinny dipping and you don't want them to see you. Whatever it is, but there's an undesirable situation there that you might have to build something into your design to deal with it. The other things that could be undesirable could be noise. Maybe you live adjacent to a busy road. You can use plants for sound abatement, or street lights. We don't have that so much in my neighborhood right now, but we do have a new neighbor to the back of us, and we have a lot of mature trees in our neighborhood, which is one of the great things about the neighborhood that we live in. And unfortunately, I don't think they feel the same way. I think those things threaten them, and so they have put up these big spotlights on every corner and every door of their house, and they're not motion sensitive. They're on all the time. And of course, that shines right into our back of our house where the bedrooms are. So, something like that, again, you might need to consider incorporating that information into your map so that you then have it and can incorporate a solution into your design. I remember views from the building to different parts of the site. When I was in school, I worked for one of my professors with some landscape installation and maintenance. And so one of the sites we went to, she stood on the back deck, and she had me go out in the yard with a rake. And she's like, oh, no, go over there. No, further back. No, okay. Now put your arms out. Now get the rake and put it up. And so I was the plant. And she was trying to figure out where it needed to be and how big to screen a specific view. And so yeah, that was, I never forgot that. But yeah, so what are you seeing when you look from the house out? But also go to other sides of the property, the furthest corner, and look back. And what are you seeing there? Other things, prevailing wind direction, we all know about that, don't we, here on the coastal part of Virginia. We've all driven down Ocean View Avenue or, the ocean front, and you see the trees that are like, those are the ones planted where the prevailing winds get to them. The ones that are planted on the other side of the building that have protection grow normal, right? And then in urban areas, it's an issue too, where buildings can tunnel the wind. And then, do you need lighting? Is it something that, yeah, you do need some for security, or maybe you need mood lighting or accent lighting because your landscape, your backyard is your entertainment, staycation type thing. What is it going on there? Is that something you need to consider? All right, so a lot of things to put on there. I mean, and this is just one round of stuff. So this map is full. Time to get the next copy, right? Just some examples of some of those things. This is the layout for this garden back here. We are sitting right here in the classroom. So there's a slope up here on this side of the building. There's a courtyard back here where you pretty much have buildings on 4 sides, so you have to look at drainage. And what we're doing here, this is a sidewalk from the parking lot. The blue lines are what was here after the classroom was built and the contractor signed off and said it's your problem now. So we had sort of ditches. These little asterisks are the storm drains, okay? And so obviously, water has to drain to them, and then water drained to the sidewalk comes down the sidewalk here to go to this one. So if it was, you know, a storm event, you could leave and be in ankle deep water going to the parking lot. Not a good thing. So the Master Gardener Water Stewards from Virginia Beach took this on as a project, and the first thing that they did was develop the base map and then look at the water issues because we knew we had them, okay? And so what they did was document what's there, and then the red arrows become the grading on how to deal with the water issues because, again, the best design in the world isn't going to work if you don't deal with some of the underlying issues first. And so, again, so in a landscape design, you know, this might be phase one, and all it is grading to deal with runoff. So that's just one example. And what we did was took the flow and dispersed it. This is a sustainable garden, and that's part of the goal is to keep the stormwater on site and use it because this garden doesn't have irrigation. I didn't want any water to go down these drains. To me, that's wasting it. And so if that's the goal, then how do you match up that goal with the site conditions, with the design? And so, you know, you grade so that water runs away from the foundation of the building because we do have a basement in this building. So that means everything runs to the center. You have to deal with this slope and stabilizing that. And then in these two places, you grade so that the water is dispersed all around instead of all funneling in one direction towards the sidewalk. And the numbers here are how we phased this project. It is not a big area, but there was a specific order that we wanted to do things in, and as people and money and supplies were available, then we did. So it was kind of like mopping or painting yourself out of a room. That's how we looked at this. You know, so we did this bed here over behind me because we needed separation between this public area and the private backyard for the graduate student housing, okay? We needed to stabilize that slope pretty quickly. That was a priority there. You know, we have to do this because what's the point of doing this and then trekking through it and messing it up to get here? So we did this one, then we sort of did this, and then this part here, this big lawn area, was where we stored all of our supplies, our equipment, all of that stuff, and so that's what got done last. All right, another base map. Let's talk plants, because again, that's one of the big components of landscaping. You've got, you know, again, the site, the users, and the plants. Because again, you can have a fabulous design, but plants can make or break it. And I just had this conversation with a stormwater engineer. We went out to a stormwater pond, and he's like, look, I'm just the engineer. I just designed the pond. I said, yes, but do you understand it doesn't matter how good your pond is designed, if you don't get the plants right, it's going to fail. Your design is going to fail. And he's like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. And I said, if you're not comfortable with plants, partner with somebody who is. Find another resource that can bring that strength, you know, to the design. But one of the things we need to talk about, what's already on the site, because it's not good practice to just go in and clear everything and start from ground zero, okay? If you've got healthy, mature plants on the site, why not utilize them, incorporate them into your design, especially trees? Because it may take you 30 minutes to cut down a tree that maybe had been 5 or 6 decades to get to that point. Oh, it's not a big deal. I'll just plant another tree. Okay, well, number one, that's time, money, and effort. Number two, the tree has got to survive. And then number three, you're going to wait 5 decades before it gets to the point where it gets to give you what the tree that was there was already doing. And so people forget that gap in time. So if you've got good, healthy plants, you know, it's important to note those and keep them and protect them if you're doing stuff on the site. And this includes turf as well. Maybe you have a nice, healthy, dense stand of turf. You know, that area is not compacted, but you don't want people dumping equipment there or driving over it or parking on it or whatever. So, you know, if it's a good plant, keep it if it fits with your design. And even if it doesn't, it's good to make note of it because you might keep it and then you may change your mind later and decide to, you know, let it go. But this also is good for plants that are in their landscape that are not good. Maybe you've got some trees that have some significant storm damage or rot or something that need to be removed. And that's something you need to know, because that's something that has to be done before you can proceed with the design. And that might, again, be phase one, get all of these plants out of there. And that's what happened to my husband and I. The house that we bought was built in the 50s, and it had the original landscape. And for about, well, up until the last 10 years, had the same owner in there, and she was a gardener. And it was obvious. It was well designed and all, and you could tell it had been well maintained. People that bought it from her knew nothing about landscaping, and they butchered it. And they were only there like 2 or 3 years, and then we bought it. And so we inherited this mess. And I like to think I'm a very good horticulturist, but even I couldn't save these plants. So they had to go, and that was one of the first things we did at this house, was go through the landscape and look at, okay, no, sorry, we can't deal with this. There's no rescuing here. These have to go. We have to start over. So, all right, hardiness, cold hardiness, and heat tolerance. Heat tolerance is a little harder to figure out. There's not a lot of information out there. But cold hardiness is usually on most of your plant labels, very easy to find. But these are like the extreme temperatures that the plants will be able to tolerate, and that kind of helps you narrow the plant palette down a little bit. And then exposures. This is important because your sun and shade angles really determine where plants are going to go and what types of features or rooms or uses of the landscapes you can have based on sun and shade. Because obviously, if you want a vegetable garden, and like my yard, 12 mature loblolly pine trees, pretty much full shade, I'm not going to have a vegetable garden in my yard. It just isn't going to happen. So you got to figure those things out. And the thing with the exposure is it changes throughout the day, and it changes throughout the year, the season. So the sun is much higher on the angle as it rises in the east and sets in the west in the summertime. It's much lower on the horizon in the wintertime. So it's swinging around instead of going up and over. And everybody knows this, even if they don't think about it. If you just drive from Norfolk here on 64, when you come around that curve at like Moorview, and then the sun's in your face now, but it isn't later in the summer. Okay? Well, trees have leaves on them later in the summer too, which helps. But yeah, so things change. And I made this mistake once. I did well, I'll wait for the graphic to tell you that story. Microclimates. This is really important because this is kind of what makes landscape design fun and what makes each site unique. And you can create microclimates with your design, or there might be microclimates already on the site that you can utilize. But what a microclimate is it's something that has unique characteristics for a very small part of the overall site. So maybe it's dry shade, maybe you've got a low wet spot, maybe you've got different types of soil in the front yard versus the backyard, which is very possible depending on how the site was constructed. So things like that are important. Maybe you've got a really nice south-facing wall or something like that. Just think all of those espaliered fruit trees on the south walls of these gardens in Europe, that they use that microclimate where the wall absorbs the heat, radiates it back overnight to protect the trees, who are not really cold hardy in that particular area. So microclimates can be a lot of fun. Are there locations that you need specific plants? Screening. Maybe you want a pollinator garden, or the vegetable garden, or an herb garden, or whatever it is. But are there specific locations where you need plants to have a specific function? Let's see. And then a lot of support documentation. Start keeping Post-it notes, keep a notebook, keep an Excel spreadsheet, however you organize information. This type of stuff, like your list of plants, is good. And what's existing on the site, but also either you or your client, do they have preferences for certain types of plants? I was doing some critiquing of some landscape designs earlier this week, and one of the ladies was presenting her design, and she said, I'm going to have hostas here, and a weeping willow tree here, and hydrangeas over here. And I said, those are very specific plant choices. Can you tell me why? She said, because they were all in my grandmother's yard. And that's why I want them in mine. So people have, specific preferences. We visited a site one time, and the husband was an avid collector of hostas. And there's a bazillion hostas out there. And he had them everywhere, but they were all in pots because they had bowls. And so he had, these ginormous hostas. He had little miniature ones, and they were all in terracotta pots. And he must have had, I swear to God, 500 of them in his yard, which was actually fascinating from a design standpoint. Because of course they all died down in the winter, so you're left with all these pots everywhere that kind of looks interesting. But you can make interesting kind of sculpture with pots or something like that, or put a winter annual in it or something. But then the really cool thing is, he's got variegateds, he's got blues, all this stuff, and then they bloom at different times of the spring and summer, and so he could have the miniatures close up, like on the patio where you could see and appreciate them. And he could have the giants in the back corner of the yard, and then he could move them around. If something was finished blooming, he could kind of go to the back, and he could pull stuff forward, that was coming into bloom. And so it was a really interesting concept and way to design his landscape around his specific plants. So you never know what you're going to encounter when you get out there. But then other documents you might want, where are you going to get plants? That's probably one of the most commonly asked questions, especially native plants. What are your sources for your plants? All right, so back to the images here, and I had, years of formal training. I did fabulous, if I do say so myself, designs and renderings with the colored pencils and all that stuff. And when I became an extension agent, that wasn't something that I did on a regular basis. I can do bubble diagrams and stick figures now. Seriously, if you don't, keep the skills up, you lose them. But this is about my speed now with landscape design. As long as it's clear enough that you understand the information, or you can convey the concept to a client, okay? So again, just things like, okay, we need some privacy over here. This is the entertainment area. Here's some existing trees, poor drainage back here, open to the neighbor's yard. We need privacy here. This is the hot, dry side of the house. So north is up, so it rises in the east, sets in the west, right? So west, southwest is your hot sun, afternoon sun. This is a little bit nicer over here. Right, but they've noticed things like here's gutters, utility lines, open and exposed feelings, sod all in here, play area for the kids. There's a fence back here, or some kind of a slope, some shade over here. So all of this information, you can see how it's coming together on these plans. And this is like living room, bedroom, whatever. Okay. The hardiness zones, again, if you're familiar with them, great. I would encourage everybody to go back and look at the maps. They have changed fairly recently because of climate change. So you may not be where you thought you were. So keep that in mind. And then, of course, the heat zone maps, it's harder to find, and it's two different organizations. This is USDA. This is the American Heart Society that does this. But it might be worth trying to track some of that down. Your sun and shade angles. Again, just to illustrate, it's if this is north, well, let's see. It's harder to see on that one. So north, so it rises in the east, sets in the west. So the red here is the angle in the summer, and then the blue is it's lower on the horizon in the winter. So what this diagram shows you is this is summer, so see the short shade here. In the winter, when it's lower on the horizon, the shade angle is wider. So my mistake was I didn't take this into account, and I designed a shade garden here. That this leading edge of it then became in the sun, in the summer. So I miscalculated and had to like transplant some plants. So prevailing winds, keep that in mind, especially with trees. It has a significant effect with trees. The other thing with prevailing winds, I tell this story. When I was an extension agent in North Carolina, I was in rural North Carolina, and we had a call come in one day. There was a hog farm, and they had built a development across the street from the hog farm. Well, the hog farm was there first, and if you know anything about hog farms, or even if you don't, they smell. So the neighbors were complaining. So the people came to us and said, can you design a landscape plan to direct the flow of wind? Because it would go across the farm into the neighborhood. I said, sure. I mean, I just thought to think about this, but you do a stepped, planting here, so that when the wind hits it, it goes up and over and goes up into the atmosphere. And so that helps eliminate some of the odor. And you say, oh, that's brilliant. How long do you think it's going to take before the landscape grows big enough to really have an impact? Yes, it can be done, but not like that. So I have no idea if they ever did it or not. It was a very interesting concept. But you can use landscapes in a wide variety of ways to solve problems is the point here. All right, again, look up. This is Arbor Day Foundation here, so that's a good graphic about, and it's not just the power lines. Those are at a certain height. But then you've got like phone and cable and other stuff underneath them that brings it down. And what you have to be aware of, all right, so if you're planting a tree, if it's over a sidewalk, you need at least 8 feet clearance, okay? And if it's over a street, that canopy needs to start at 14 feet because otherwise trucks going down will grab branches and pull them off the trees. So you've got to figure out, how high the bottom of the canopy needs to be, where does that start, but then how low does the top need to be? And one of the things that I learned is with Dominion, there's different lines. There's transmission and there's distribution lines. And there's different codes for how far around those lines you have to have it cleared. And so as you're leaving today, maybe look at the Dominion line that cuts through our property up here. So it's on the left as you leave. And we had to have quite a few trees taken down when they have to have like a 50-foot clearance around those lines. And the reason why it's so much, and I was like, really? If you got, it's not going to fall on the lines if the lines are up there and the trees down here. No, the lines sag in the heat of the summer. And so, that 50 feet may actually sag to 20 feet clearance at some point in the summer. I'm like, and I think somebody correct me if I'm wrong, transmission lines have more power in them than distribution lines. And therefore, there's a wider clearance around them. I think the distribution lines, it might only be 30 feet. And if you remember, I don't know how long ago it was, a few years, there was a big to-do in Chesapeake because I guess the power company hadn't been sort of enforcing clearance of their lines, and people had planted trees and built sheds and stuff, under the lines, and they were having to take all this stuff out. And that happened kind of, I think, fairly soon after that big event where a tree fell on a line and caused a cascade blackout effect that went all up through New England and into Canada. And the government said, never again, or you'll be paying like $1 bazillion a day in fines. So
is it Dominion's responsibility to come and take that tree out, or is it yours?
I think it depends. Dominion has crews, and they run the crews about every 3 years because they come through here and they always let us know they're on the property and they might need to do some pruning and whatnot. But then in like municipalities, I think the city is responsible for some of it, and I don't think they ever do it themselves. They usually contract it out because that is a very specialized and highly dangerous job. And they contract it out to arborists, arbor companies that have that certification or capability, training to do that. And I don't know that there's a specific timeline on it. I think again, it's like a 2 to 3 year cycle, because by the time they get through the city, and then it's like 2 years, and then they can start all over again. So that's job security.
Yeah.
So that's the looking up part of it. And then of course there's how close to the house do you plant them, and where? Which side of the house do you plant them, if you're looking for maybe passive solar heating, cooling, or protection from prevailing winds, that sort of thing to consider as well. All right, so with those base maps aside, let's either get another base map or start a list of something. You're moving on to the user analysis now. So what is the end goal here? And the thing to remember is landscapes change over time. You're dealing with dynamic living things here. So they're going to change over time, but also the user is going to change over time, okay? So, you know, are you the bachelor dude and really all you're worried about is keeping the grass mowed? You know, well, maybe, you know, you're, you know, a young family with kids that need the landscape to have play space. And maybe the kids are 4-footed and furry and you need to make accommodations for them. Or maybe you're the empty nesters and now the landscape becomes your entertainment pad, you know, for wild parties. You know, or maybe you're sort of senior and for whatever reason, you know, you still want to enjoy your landscape, but now it needs to be one that is a much lower maintenance landscape. Or maybe you move and you decide to keep the property and now it becomes rental property. Well, that's not going to be maintained at the same level, quality, same functionality as when you live there. So, you know, landscapes change over time, and you have to keep that in mind. So what are the end goals here? And maybe it's just an end goal for one space or for the whole landscape. How are you accessing this landscape? Again, pedestrian and vehicular access to different areas of it. What's going on in these spaces? What are they being used for? Do you need a large lawn area for the kids' soccer practice? You know, do you, or I worked again with my professor, they had the most absolute beautiful, perfect lawn. It was Bermuda, I think mowed to like 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. You know, it was all hand weeded. It was perfectly, and I'm like, you know, the rest of their landscape was kind of naturalized. These people were obsessed with bocce ball. And that's what they used the lawn for. And it had to meet certain specifications. So again, that goes back to who's doing what. And then are the activities seasonal? Are you doing them only certain times of the year, like maybe a summer vegetable garden? Or like in my case, I lived on a tidal marsh. You know, I needed my backyard. I had to put my kayak in because we could put in the kayak in a canal that was behind the house. You know, so we needed access and pulling in and out and storage of the kayak in the summer. But when I'm not kayaking in the wintertime, you know, it went in a storage area. So I had to have both the storage area for it in the winter and then, you know, the area for it in the summer when we used it. It was a seasonal activity. So other situations that you might need to consider. We all have some type of utility space in our landscapes. You know, we have the public access part, which is usually people's front yards. That's public view that you kind of have to keep it maintained to a certain level. We have the backyard, which is our private personal space. And then we have some type of a service or utility area. So where the garbage cans go, maybe the compost bin, you know, all those plants. Wait a minute. How many of you suffer from CHAD? Compulsive horticultural acquisition disorder. See the plant, fall in love with it, gotta have it, buy it and take it home, and then you're standing there holding it going, where am I gonna plant this? So it goes into that utility area until you figure it out. But other things, are you putting in a shed, a workshop, you know, whatever. What is the user's budget? What is their timeline? Are you looking for plants for energy efficiency, whether it's shading the HVAC system to keep it, shaded in the hot summer so that the equipment isn't working so hard and has a longer life expectancy, something like that. So energy efficiency. And then I need to put on here, what is their ability or capability? Okay. Are they a good do-it-yourselfer? Are they a gardener? Or do they just want it to look nice and they're going to end up paying somebody to do it? That makes a difference. And then again, evaluation over time, because again, things change over time. I did my sister's front yard landscaping, and it was nice and low maintenance, and everybody was happy until she calls me up one day. She says, "You got to redesign my front yard." I'm like, "What's going on?" She says, "I have to have a handicap ramp put on the front of my house." So that definitely impacts, and creates a whole new scenario of how you have to design for things. You also need to take into consideration the architecture of whatever the structure is on the site. This sort of lush tropical Mediterranean, this palm tree here would look really out of place here, and like this really more formal, hedges and whatnot, versus a very modern where you probably want your landscape to be minimalistic because the focus, is the structure, versus kind of what we really live in, right? This is actually a good example of something. This is like the 20-year landscape. You got they actually picked one of everything, I think, at the garden center, and then tried to prune them all the same. And you prune them like 3 times a year for 20 years, and this is what you get. They're really sparse. They have no lower limbs. It's time for redesign, re-envisioning this landscape. So a renovation.
That literally looks like my house. We bought it 2 years ago and we haven't messed with it. It literally looks like my house.
So again, you take your base map and you do your bubble diagram. Where's your public and your private, kids play area? What kind of activities are you doing in what parts of the landscape? And how are you getting to these parts? Because part of the design is the flow from one space to the next. And it's very different if you're coming over here maybe every now and then, versus over here, this is a high access area here, to get from this point to here and back and forth, or this is where you pull out your trash cans once a week and something like that. So 2 very different flow types and frequencies that you need to account for in the design. So if you're going to spend money on pretty plants, where are you going to put them? Where you see them frequently, not over here where your neighbor's going to enjoy them, but you're rarely in that part of the yard. All right, so just a real quick assessment. This was my house in Norfolk. We had, and I never knew I was going to use these pictures for a presentation, so I didn't take pictures of it initially. But we had the Japanese privet hedges here. Those are large evergreen shrubs. They're 15 to 18 feet tall. So I was pruning those suckers 3 times a year to keep them below my windows so I could see out my windows. We have a maple tree here. If you know anything about maple trees, their roots are fairly shallow, more on the surface, a lot of competition, uneven yard, that sort of thing. Shade, which is not a bad thing, but it's just the conditions of what was there. And there wasn't much else there except some scraggly Bermuda, fescue, and a bunch of different weeds. Fairly tight yard. This line here between the 2 fences denotes the property line between me and my neighbor, okay? The neighbor here was in her 90s. The one on the left was in the 80s. The one across the street was in the upper 80s, which I had no idea I needed to know that until. All right, so that's why the car is parked here. We have a garage, but again, the house, this house was built early 50s, I believe. The garages were built for the cars at the time, not the cars today. So even though I didn't have a big car, it really didn't fit comfortably in the garage. Plus I had the garage packed with other stuff. So that meant 1 car parking in the driveway. But you think, okay, we'll just park on the street in front of your house. After the car was hit twice by the neighbors backing out of their driveway. Because this lady over here in her 90s, I swear to God, she had like a Richard Petty complex. It didn't matter if she was going forward or backwards, it was just step on the accelerator. But anyway, so then we, assessed that we needed to start parking our vehicles over here, which then means that this lawn area over here needs to be managed different than the lawn area over here, especially for compaction. So this gets aerated every year, this every 3 years, kind of a thing. With the shade, well, what we did was we made some beds to incorporate some different plants. I wanted to put different canopy layers, a couple more trees, some shrubs, and then the first year or two that I lived here, I had annuals everywhere. It was my first house, wanted it to be gorgeous, and after dragging the hose for a couple of years, I'm like, annuals are only going where I can reach them with the hose, where I can see them and enjoy them. That's less stress on the budget, less stress on me, and the plants. And then let's see, the grass. We have to have grass. Hubby says we have to have grass. If it was my choice, we'd not have grass. But that's fine. This is the public-facing part of our landscape. So we both agreed, though, we wanted low-maintenance grass. So for me, that means a warm season turf grass, which is a spreader, and requires minimal mowing, minimal fertilizer, and whatnot. But warm season grasses go dormant in the winter. And if you talk to a turf guy, it's nice and golden, and no, it's brown and it's ugly. It's dormant. So how to get around that situation? I stole. I'm a scientist. We're into R&D, and that means rip off and duplicate.
That's funny.
Brent and Becky's bulbs in Gloucester. I saw a presentation he gave. So when the grass is dormant, I've got 500 crocus bulbs planted there that come up in the spring. The whites and yellows come in first. The burgundies and purples come in later, a few weeks later. And it lets me know spring is on the way. And it's not a conflict, because by the time that the crocus die down, that's about the time you start your first mowing. I don't have to mow that for 6 months of the year. Yay, team! Because that means I'm not out there having to do stuff in the wintertime. The first choice of grass would have been St. Augustine, because it is the most shade tolerant. That's the site analysis. The user analysis says Laurie doesn't like St. Augustine. It is a wide-bladed grass. To me, that looks coarse. It has a coarse texture. And if you don't keep your lawnmower blade really sharp, then instead of cutting, it rips the blade and makes the top look brown all the time, so it looks like your grass has got a disease. So that's the user analysis part of it. So the choice from a design perspective then becomes choice number 2, which is zoysia grass, which is still shade tolerant, not as much, but it works okay. So that's kind of how you do the analysis on the property. All right, just other situations, property changes. So it was some sort of obviously there's pets, and really bad, ground, no grass and stuff here, but this is what that wanted to become. So, getting rid of these overgrown shrubs here, putting something more manageable, safety fencing because it's a kid's play area. You don't want grass under here it would be a maintenance nightmare to mow, but you do need some grass. But then you also have an area over here for like picnics and hardscape stuff, which kind of they had done before, but now it's a little more functional. I don't know where the pets went. And then one lady looked at this picture. She said, that would never work for me and my kids because they want to jump off of here and grab the lines. I was like, ew. Well, but that's something that would come out in the user analysis. So maybe you would need a different type of a play system that was lower profile. But again, look at the complexity of the lines here and what you're trying to do in that site. So what do you think about this landscape? That's pretty much the reaction everybody gives every time. So let me put it in perspective for you. This is the Netherlands. This happens to be the building where I did my PhD work. If you've ever been to the Netherlands, they generally have 200 plus days of overcast or cloudy. So light is very important to them, which is why if you're over there, you see all the windows rarely have blinds or draperies or anything like that because they want the light when they can get it. All right, so big, lots of windows everywhere. All right, so this is the main building. Here's the entranceway. This is a roadway here where you come in and then you turn down here and park over here, okay? You know, on the phone, having a conversation with somebody, you walk out and boom, 3 or 4 steps, you're in the roadway. You could become a boat owner, okay? So criteria number 1 for this landscape, they needed it to separate pedestrian and vehicular traffic flow. Okay. Number 2, stormwater is an issue over there, so they need canopy because trees are really excellent at stormwater management. But they don't want trees that block the windows and block the light, so you need a big enough tree to get up. The canopy starts above that 2nd floor so that light comes in. They're really not worried about sun and shade seasonally, other than that they don't want the shade. And then you can see they have the 2 mature, and they've actually replaced one that they lost here. So then they still wanted some under canopy. So this is yellow twig dogwood, which is a thicket-forming shrub. And so it's a green blob, and it does have some flowers on it in the spring. But then in the wintertime, it looks like this, which provides some seasonal interest. And then they underplanted it with a ground cover because, you know, it's one bed. They don't want to have to do constant maintenance of this. And you can't have a lot of plant debris, mulch, stuff like this that washes because this is permeable paving. So, you know, water has to go through it, which means you have to keep the pore space open, which we'll talk more about that in the water quality talk. So, having said all that and listed all the criteria that this landscape needed to meet, now what do you think of the design?
It's appropriate.
Okay, it checks the boxes. Now, there's probably 10 other ways that this could have been designed that would have accomplished the same thing. But again, that information is critical. All right, this is the back corner of my old house. So originally there was a little rain garden here, so hence the tropical plants and stuff, and the rain garden is where the downspout just kind of dumps into like a really small, rain garden is a puddle with plants, basically. More about that next topic. So over time though, and this is over the course of about a 10-year period, I decided I wanted a vegetable garden. And I decided I didn't like the bill from the city for my water, for watering that said vegetable garden. So I was gonna put in a rain barrel system, but I was cheap. Didn't want to go buy a rain barrel, so I tried to make my own. That's what this hodgepodge of stuff is here. So the downspout now runs into rain barrels, not into the rain garden anymore. So that then just got planted with a shrub. If you look at the bed edge, this is Bermuda and weeds. It's right off the corner of the house, right here. Okay, the trees that we planted grow, right, and provide shade, which is what we wanted. But you can't grow vegetables in the shade. So it's a vegetable garden had to leave after a while, and the bed edge here moves out here because you can't grow grass real well in the shade either. And I wasn't going to, and I think I've got a picture, I wasn't going to put into the backyard the effort that I put into the front, okay, for various reasons. And then eventually the river birch gets big and this loblolly pine tree gets big, the canopies merge, and the bed edge goes from here to out here, okay? And it's really not a nice looking area, but we had big dogs who could tear it up easily, and they just basically needed a place to do their business. And then, again, I told you I lived on a tidal marsh, so the backyard got flooded periodically. So I didn't care what grew in there as long as it grew. So anyway, so that's how that changed. All right, let's talk elements, principles of design. This starts getting a little more technical, and my philosophy on this is you kind of know when it's right and when it's not, but it's some things to think about, keep in the back of your mind, okay? So let's take a look. Scale. This is things in the landscape in relation to each other. And the easiest example of this is when you look at houses, is it the little house that got swallowed up, you know, by the big landscape, the oversized trees and things, and it's just not in scale? Or is it the big house with the little teeny landscape? It's kind of out of scale. So, and we've all done this, you know, we've walked into landscapes and we're like, oh, this is nice, but it's not comfortable. I don't really want to spend time here. And a lot of that has to do with that scale factor of design. You know, it's like Goldilocks and the three landscapes. You know, get it just right, okay? And sometimes, again, you have to wait for things to mature, but, you know, this is, this is like a 3-story house or plus, if you've got this stuff up here. These little evergreen, hedges thingies here are never gonna, you need some massive oak trees or something out there to really, make the house and the landscape connect from a scale perspective. Balance. Would you say both of these landscapes are balanced? Yeah. Yeah. Balance can take different forms, but it's kind of the visual weight, if you will, of a landscape. So it's real easy to see whether something is balanced when you have a symmetrical landscape. So you have this walkway here that divides it, and everything over here is exactly the same as what's over here. And it's all balanced. And you've got all these angles and right angles and straight lines on the hedges, on the walkways, on the turf. All of the little daffodils are planted in nice little rows, and you say, okay, well, shouldn't this stick out? This is round when everything else is very angular. No, because it is a perfect circle. So, there's the balance. It's all symmetrical and works. Right. This one, it's a little bit tougher. So the balance here comes again, you still have this sort of central thing, but the balance is you've got curves over here and curves over here. You've got hot, bright colors over here, hot, bright colors over here. It would be unbalanced if you have these hot, bright colors and then you do pastels over here. The visual weight would be different. You've got, plants that come up and kind of have this arching, weepy habit over here, and you do the same thing over here. So that's the balance there, okay, with the growth habits of the plants, with the colors, with the repetition of the curvature, things like that. So symmetrical or formal and asymmetrical or informal types of balance. It's how things are distributed. Unity. I'm using the same two pictures. That's not a mistake. Are these landscapes unified? Yes. Okay. So again, what's here is here, and you've repeated it. You've got, it's all different shades of green, but you've got a lot of greens. And again, you've got the unity. Everything belongs together. It would be, you wouldn't have unity here if you put in like a weeping willow, or a weeping cherry tree or something like that. It wouldn't work in that landscape. Over here, the unity comes from, again, the curvature, but the growth habits, the colors that were selected. I mean, you've got a lot of different colors, but they're all intense colors. They belong here. Again, if you pop the pastel in there, or if you started, over here, did a very formal hedge, it sticks out like a sore thumb. It doesn't work in the landscape, and that's what unity is about. All of the different pieces belong together. Then you've got rhythm, and this is, to me, you have it or you don't. It's not. There's no in between here. Okay, and sometimes you don't want it. You don't always have to have it. Okay, but it's the repetition and predictability. And so for here, it's like, okay, each of these concrete things is exactly the same size. So it's 1, 2, 3, step over the line. 1, 2, 3, step over the line. It's the same rhythm as you walk down that sidewalk. And it's reinforced by the fact that you have spiky, tall, skinny, round, spiky, tall, skinny, round. And they've repeated that over and over down that walkway, okay? And so that's the repetition there. Here, it's easy to see too. What they've done is use the 8-foot sections of the fence. Purple, yellow, pink rose, purple, yellow, pink rose. And it corresponds to the repetition of the same size segments of the sidewalk, okay? This is also rhythm. You've got 3 different materials, the black stones, the green grass, and the concrete, but the repetition and it all goes together and is unified because all of those squares are exactly the same size. So that no matter how you walk on it, in which direction, it's all the same step, same rhythm, because they're all the same size.
But you can play with this. Like if you're walking down here, you know, you've got this design here, and all you've done is flipped it. So it's the same design, but now it's reversed on that side. So you could do it that way as well. But now you've got the same plants, you know, you can do it in different ways. And that's the fun of design. This is the one that people, I don't know, people have the most fun with, or they get hung up on, or it's just bad. Have you ever walked into somebody's landscape and you just stopped because you didn't know what to look at first? There was no pathway for the eye to follow. It was like maybe you know, the yard art store just threw up in this landscape. You know, you have one of everything. Or you know, the gnomes proliferated, and now they're everywhere. So this is one that less is more. You know, just less is more. So with accents, it's a focus. And sort of the design rule is you really should only have one kind of focus or accent per space. So if you've divided your landscape up into different spaces, each one should have one kind of focal point. Or you don't have to have any focal point. But focal points are nice and fun to work with, and you can do it in a wide variety of ways. So this is a very narrow pathway here, and it's not really meant for you to walk down it. It's meant for you to look down it. And so, you know, these arbors here, you know, draw your eye down, and then boom, it stops. Your eye stops because that's the focal point right there. If that was not there, your eye would just keep going across the grass and into the wooded beyond, you know, and you're just like, okay. But now you've got an accent or a focal point that makes you stop and pause, maybe think, or whatever. What's the focal point in this landscape? That tree, and I do not know what tree it is. Sorry, somebody asked me that, and I'm not sure. But yeah, and so the rest of the landscape kind of takes second place to that. And it's a focal point whether you're on the water or whether you're in the house or in the landscape. But it is the one thing for that space. And you can have something else on the side yard or the front yard or whatever. Heck, that may be the front yard. That may be one of the communities, you know, your company arrives by boat, you know, whatever. But again, you can do it different ways. So you can do it by size. You can have things in the landscape that are all about the same size and then put something totally different size-wise. You can do it with texture. Maybe you got a bunch of, you know, little liriopes here, and then you put a giant hosta in there. Very different textures, so the hosta becomes the focus. You can do it with color. Maybe everything's the same size, but, you know, it's all green, but then now you put a variegated or you put a burgundy leaf something in there. That's different. Or maybe you've got all your plants and your focal becomes sculpture or yard art or something like that. You know, I have a friend who is he's a sculptor, and he does really big stuff, not, you know, little stuff. And so his whole yard is designed around these spaces where his sculpture is the focus of each of these different spaces. So, and then you can do it with the growth habit of the plant. Maybe everything is round or upright or something, and you put in a weeper, for instance. And that, again, because of the change, becomes the focus. So accent's fun, but it can very, very easily be overdone. All right. Let's talk sustainable and resilient landscapes. Again, are they low maintenance is what people want. They call them environmentally friendly landscapes, green landscapes, well, duh. And then conservation landscaping. So it depends on who you talk to, what they're saying. Sustainable is the ability of the landscape to kind of maintain itself over time, long term. Resilient is often used interchangeably with sustainability, but it is not the same thing. Resilient is the ability of the landscape to recover from a problem. A drought, a storm, a pest problem, somebody who doesn't know how to prune, yeah, whatever the problem is, it's the ability of the landscape to recover. And they usually go hand in hand, but they're not the same thing. So, The concepts are diversity, because the more diversity you have with plants, the more diversity you have with insects and other creatures. And that's important because that's what makes it a plant community and makes it sustainable and resilient, as opposed to a monoculture of plants, and they don't grow in a community. It's a plant surrounded by an ocean of sterile mulch, and if something happens, it's really obvious, and it takes a while if it will ever recover. Whereas if you've got diversity, something may not survive, but other things will. The majority of things will. And that's that whole concept, so diversity. The other thing is, how many of you know Doug Ptolemy? If not, look him up. Dr. Douglas Ptolemy. He's an entomologist out of University of Delaware. He's the one who probably, 10 or more years ago, really made the connection between the plants that are in your landscape, the insects that are on those plants, and the songbirds that you want in your landscape. If you do not have the plants that grow the caterpillars, that the adults feed the young birds, you will not have birds. You're more likely to have a nest and watch the babies die, which is just horrifying to me. But he made the connection. He's a great speaker. He's got stuff online if you want to watch it. He's got good books, and he's got charts to help you pick plants. If attracting songbirds is the goal of your landscape design, you need to become intimately familiar with Doug Ptolemy and his information. But that's all biological diversity in plant communities.
Like spell his name.
Tallamy. Ptolemy. He's the one who's got the homegrown national park movement now.
Just say P. Or
T. T is in turtle.
What is his whole name?
Douglas Ptolemy. Tallamy. All right. Resource conservation. This includes, the existing plants. If they're good, keep them. It includes purchasing supplies and materials from nearby so that you can serve, gas and water and labor and all of that type of stuff. And it involves conserving your budget and your time and energy as well. Designing in a way that accommodates all of that. It also includes long-term planning. We can design and have a landscape look really good almost immediately, but then what's going to happen in a year, in 5 years, in 50 years? I was talking to a group earlier this week, the Allenton Garden Club actually. We went out and we were walking around, and it was really windy, and of course we have pear trees, the calorie pears, and the blooms were just blowing all over the place. And it's like, my goal before I retire is to get rid of all of the pear trees on the property. Not only the ones that are in our landscape, but the seedlings that have now become invasive in the natural areas of our property. So that's my short-term goal. My long-term goal is planting plants that will be here long after I retire, specifically large trees, to replace those pears, but also to carry on the tree canopy and the diversity of trees on the property over time. Low impact and input. This is low impact on the site, and again, on you or whoever's doing the work, okay? And then water conservation, because water connects everything and is an integral part of a landscape. Do you want it to be part of your design? Somebody the other day, one of the designs I was critiquing, she wanted a koi pond in her yard, okay? Or a fountain, or maybe you just want it to be sustainable and keep the water on the site so that it takes care of itself. Or maybe it's stormwater that you're trying to manage with the design. So all of these things factor into the sustainable and resilient landscapes. All right, so this is just the habitat garden out in the main garden area. You have a garden map as one of your handouts. If you have not had occasion to walk through our 28 different demonstration gardens, we're not going to do that today. But there's nicer days ahead that you're always welcome to come back anytime. But this garden was designed specifically to attract, support, and protect small creatures. Frogs, toads, lizards, stuff like that. So from the plants that were selected, to how they were planted, to the water features that were put in there, that sort of thing.
Can we just come out and walk around, or we need to check in, or?
All right, the gardens are open to the public free of charge year-round, daylight hours.
So we don't have to come
Including
and knock on your
weekends.
door? and-
No,
Okay.
no, they're public access, there's no lockdowns or anything. You can park here at the building and walk out, or you can park, there's about 6 spots out there right off Diamond Springs Road that kind of park you in the gardens. The chain link fence, there's a vehicle gate in it, that is locked at 5 o'clock every evening and opened at 8 o'clock every morning. So if you actually wanted to drive out there, you could. It is locked over the weekends because we've had people drive out there, dig stuff up and steal it.
Oh, wow.
Oh, no.
Pedestrian gate though is always open, in that chain link fence. So if you want to just drive up to the fence on a weekend and park on the road, and then walk through, you can. But yeah, no, the gardens are there and we do our best to keep everything legal, so. All right, just again, the difference landscape design makes. This or this? What do you want here? This is my house now. And you see my 12 mature pine trees and the live oak here. So I wanted a pollinator garden, but I do not have sunshine, except the longest time I have sunshine is right here at the end of the driveway, surprisingly. So that's where my pollinator garden is. That's how I chose to design it, to deal with the site conditions and then what I wanted. And it's fun. And I remembered that pasta dude, so, as things bloom, they're in the front. As they're kind of finished blooming, they go to the back and new things come up front and things move around. And I have even trees like a pawpaw tree and some shrubbery back here. There's a button bush and a clethra and most of this is native, but I have some non-native stuff in here too that's good for pollinators. So that's how I solved that problem. Here's how a friend of mine did hers. She wanted to transition a lot of her turf into native plantings. She did phases. So phase 1, she researched all the plants that she wanted in her garden. Okay, and then she would go buy them. She had a real tight budget, and then she'd propagate them so she'd eventually have enough. So that took a couple years, and she was saving her money because she doesn't do landscape design. So she waited and researched and found a landscape designer that she liked their work, waited a year on that lady's wait list to get her yard design. And she can only plant 10 plants at a time. That's physically all she's able to do. So she lays out the beds, sprayed it out. She put compost on everything. She plants her 10 plants and immediately mulches them, and that's all she can do for that cycle of gardening. And then she's got flags laying out where other plants are going to go. And then she doesn't have, and you don't really have to have landscape design training, but the way that you are trained is it's like a bird flying over and you're looking down on the landscape. Well, people's brains work different, and hers just doesn't do that, which was a lesson to me. So what she did was, again, in researching the plants, how big does it get? So she took cardboard and cut out circles for how big these shrubs are going to get, spray painted it out so she'd know how to space them and plant them in the landscape, okay? Which I thought was extremely clever. Tied her landscape into what was going on in her neighbor's yard so it looked like it connected and belonged. And this was phase 1. Phase 2 is over here. Phase 3 is the backyard. That was fall. This is spring. Whoops, I don't have the summer one where you've got the grasses and whatnot. And so she grabs people off the street as they walk by and explains to them what she's doing.
Oh, I
Because
love
it's also a lot of curiosity in the landscape, in her neighborhood. All right, this is the garden out here, right out this door. Assessing, these were camellias that were left over from a previous faculty member's research project. They were healthy, but they were branched to the ground, okay, with lots of debris. Design, you do not want large evergreen shrubs adjacent to building entrances because it can hide people, okay? When I was at North Carolina State, we called it pervert pruning, where you had to thin out or limb up so that nobody could hide in the bushes. And it was a college campus too. But perfectly healthy plants, why would I want to pull them out? But I have some things I have to deal with. So limbing them up into small tree form, it's just a different way to look at them, but it reduces the canopy, it gives clear sight lines, and it ultimately reduces the debris, okay, and gives me some mid-level canopy plants that I would have had to have waited years for them to get that big, okay? And then, the question is, okay, well, this is the way the contractor left it. Do I really want that little strip of grass there to maintain? So you'll see that disappeared and is now a ground cover demonstration. This was the phase one where we had to separate this landscape from the graduates housing over here. We had some full camellias. We had some red buds. These are American hollies. Leave them all. They're happy. They're good. These are Indian hawthorns. Fabulous. Plants I don't have to pay for or whatever. And then what we did was set the bed edge, set the bed, and then when it came time to planted really densely. Included more shrubs, lots of perennials, another small tree to make that separation more dense. It wouldn't have worked for me to limb these camellias up over here. That wouldn't fit the point of that particular part of the landscape. Okay, so again, the decisions that you make. Know the plants, for heaven's sakes, know the plants. Over the years, I have dealt with many landscape architects, and I don't have a really high opinion of them. And I'm married to one, but I would never have married him if he didn't know his plants, because they're really great at the design and the structure, but when it comes to matching plants to fulfill the design, my experience has been that they don't know the plants, and that causes a lot of problems. This plant sounds cool, looks cool in this little pot. Uh-oh, Chad rears its head, gotta have it. But then I'm the one who gets the call. It's taking over my yard, how do I get rid of it? Well, you might have known this if you had researched the plant. But yeah, so, and especially again, depending on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to do pollinators, which pollinators are you supporting? Is it bees? Is it butterflies? Is it hummingbirds? They need different plants. They need plants to lay eggs on, plants to eat, plants to nectar on, and plants summer, spring, fall, and even winter. So you kind of have to, match your plants up. Recycle, it can be so much fun. And it's always interesting to see how people find a new and different use for things in the landscape, okay? This was a maple tree my neighbors planted, and it died, didn't make it. So instead of just yanking the thing out, they cut it off and put a birdhouse on it. So they got another 2 years out of it till they figured out what they wanted to put there, or if they wanted to put a tree there after all. So different things as far as recycling. That diversity is important because, again, plant diversity supports insect diversity. And again, for a sustainable landscape, the diversity will support the good guys, which will fight your battles against the bad guys. When you have praying mantises and ladybugs and lacewings and all these other things, then you don't really have so much aphids and other kinds of undesirable pest problems because they're kept in check, okay? You may have a little bit, but the good guys keep them in check. Right? Do you know what this is? Swallowtail or monarch, one or the other. You have to understand which way the stripes work for it. But how they call me up, I planted milkweed for the monarchs, but these darn worms keep coming and eating the plants. And I have to go out here and pick them off and get rid of them. And I'm like, no! So you have to take a deep breath and go, okay, how do I explain this to the lady so that she's not like mortally embarrassed, okay, about this? Anyway, all right, we'll wrap up here with some things. You often either are going to, in a design, incorporate hardscape and structures, or they're already there that you have to deal with them. But those things, just like plants, have certain looks and feels to them. Using wood versus stone. If you're using, something like raised beds here for terracing and stuff, versus something different for the walkway versus something different for around the pool, kind of a thing. But what's going where, and again, does it sort of sing and play nice with the rest of the design, or using it in a way that it fulfills what your vision of the space is going to be. Even if you take something like brick, how you lay it. And I mean, We said, what? How many different ways can you lay tile on a kitchen backsplash? You know, every new HGTV show I watch, you know, how are you doing it different? But again, very, very different look to things. You know, those stone beds versus these types of beds. When you have these types of materials that you're dealing with on site, things that you have to think about. Are you using natural products, synthetic products, or recycled products? So for instance, the benches in our gardens here, they really need to last a long time, be indestructible almost. So we're in the process now of replacing all the wooden benches that are rotting out. The metal ones are gone because they rusted. And we're going with Trex now, which is a recycled product, very low maintenance, very long lasting. Okay. I expect to totter back here in my retirement and have the benches, you know, that I put into these designs still here, still functioning properly. How are you gonna, well, sourcing and availability of things. Does it fit in the budget? Are you doing it or paying somebody to do it? And a lot of times hard stuff needs to be done first before you put in the plants, because those people, again, don't pay attention to plants. And unless you put a chain link fence somewhere, they're going to trot on your plants or whatever. And this may have to be phase one. And then you know, the rest of the design phase two. Shipping and hauling can cost you a lot, which is why resource conservation, maybe looking at products that are closer to your location. Storage and security. I was doing a rain garden installation over at the East Beach Recreation or Community Center, okay? And I wanted to go over and put all the plants in place according to the design on the Friday afternoon and have them ready so that when the volunteers got there at 9 o'clock Saturday morning, everything was in place. All we had to do was explain that you plant the green side of the plant up and then let them go. So I was coordinating with the whoever the rec center manager was, and she says, well, yeah, sure, you can bring them over, but you're going to have to lock them in the building overnight, because if you put them out Friday afternoon, they may not be there Saturday morning. Hello. I was there at the butt crack of dawn Saturday morning, pulling plants out of the building, trying to put them in place, and the sun wasn't up yet. So anyway, and then again, are there restrictions with things like this? I had a friend call me. She says, Laurie, I need a fast-growing evergreen. I have to hide my rain barrel because the HOA provisions say no rain barrels in the front yard. They have to be in the backyard, out of sight. And I'm determined to have it in the front yard. So what do you recommend? And then she turned around and kind of thumbed her nose at the HOA by having the most beautiful yard in that community and getting on the neighborhood garden tour. That's her yard was where everybody wanted to go and look and see what she had done. So pretty cool. Yeah, great. So again, with planning design, look at what the different areas are going to be used for, how you need to separate them, transition between them, where you need screening, privacy, whatever, shade and wind breaks, where it's appropriate to have accents. You know, this maple right here is the accent, and it kind of plays off of the door here. And then what activities are being done in those sites and how they might change over time, and then what the environmental conditions are. So these are all these pieces that you put together. If you're going to be doing this yourself, there are symbols and things that you can use other than just bubbles. At some point you need to get a little more specific, and there's different ones out there. This is your planting chart. So common name, scientific name, or botanical name. You know, maybe you put height, how many you need. If you're running this in Excel, how much does it cost? And you can run your budget numbers and stuff and keep track, you know, or keep track of which nursery is selling what at what cost. And, you know, where you're going to, so you have a way to go, okay, I'm buying these 10 different plants at this nursery, but the better deal is over here for these other plants, kind of, you know, that's easy to do. You definitely need the botanic name, okay? Case in point, I was doing a rain garden at an elementary school and working with the city of Norfolk on it. And the guy, the stormwater guy calls me up. He says, hey, the contractor called me relative to your plant recommendations. You had Cornus sericea listed. He wants to know if he can substitute Cornus florida. No, absolutely not. Ornis sericea is a multi-stemmed, thicket-forming dogwood. It's redwood dogwood. Okay, it's a native plant. He wanted to know if he could substitute the native flowering dogwood tree, which is a 30 to 40 foot tree. No, it's not the same plant, not the same function. And it would have been a safety issue. Common names are fine in conversation and whatever to clients and whatnot, but you need to spec the botanical names so that they know exactly. They're saying to the contractor, these are the plants we want. You know, if you're going to a nursery going, I want this plant, you have to have that so you get exactly what you want. Again, this is great if you're inclined. It takes a lot of time and effort to do plans and renderings by hand. And then if something changes, you change your mind, the client changes your mind, you got to do it all over again. So a lot of times people now prefer to use software. I do not have any recommendations on software. There's so many different ones out there. What you do need to do is the criteria. How often are you going to be doing this? How much money do you want to put into something like this? What's the learning curve for learning how to use it? And then do you have the right computer capabilities to do it? You know, I can put something on my home computer like this. My husband can't put CAD on his computer. He doesn't have enough, whatever it is that it's needed to put that particular design package on there. It's too complicated. But yeah, you can have different symbols. You can do your plant charts. You know, you can make it look nice and pretty. You know, you can do something like this. How many of us have like pulled our hair back, taken our picture, put it on the internet, and played with different hairstyles, right? Or when we redid the front door in our house, that's what the guy did. He took a picture of our house, put it in his computer, and then he could put different doors on the front of our house so we could see what it looked like. There's software you can do that. You know, they're on the HGTV, when you walk, you know, they do the design and then it looks like you're walking through it, right? So yeah, there's software out there that you can do this with. All right, this is the power of landscape design. These are both pathways to get you from point A to point B. But the trip is very different depending upon which one you take, right? And that's design. You know, this is a more cottagey, casual kind of a design here. This is very, to me, formal, symmetrical. You know, who stripes are grass? You know, but the pergola here mimics the walkway. You know, you've got the circles and the different types of hardscape materials. You know, and different things. So again, you still get from point A to point B, but the design is what creates the experience you have as you get there. Different resources. We're very fortunate in Virginia to have our native plant guides. This is a really good one, but it's really hard to get your hands on a hard copy. And the pictures are minuscule, but the cultural information is fabulous. And they do have it online. Both of these are online that you can download. One thing to keep in mind, native plants, they can be bullies and they can be invasive, and it's not always the best choice. Just because it's native doesn't mean it's the right plant. And you don't have to go all native or not. If you can integrate, and they can all play this.
Laurie, I'll put this in your Google Drive for you.
Oh, great.
Okay.
Okay. Energy conservation, we've talked about it a couple of times, using plants in that way. You want deciduous trees on the south-southwest side, so you get shade in the hot part of the sun of the day. The leaves fall, your building absorbs the heat from the sun in the winter, that sort of thing. And you'll see that out here. We did trellises in the courtyard that we put annual vines on. Shading your HVAC.
Can you repeat what you just said? You said on the southeast side?
Yes, south-southwest.
Oh.
Sun rises in the east. Morning sun is nice. It's softer. It's cooler. Your temperatures rise during the day. Your sun is more intense. And that south-southwest side, as the sun sets, is your hottest part of your landscape. The The more plants, the better, especially if you layer canopies, because plants can actually impact the temperature. We've all done it. Yesterday, when I was giving the tour, we were standing out here looking at the rain garden, and we're over here in the shade, and it was kind of breezy and chilly. Everybody kept going this way, into the sun. So, the shade of plants can make a big difference in your temperature. Evergreens on the north side, if that's where your prevailing winds are coming from in the winter, you don't want cold winds hitting the house, sucking your heat out, right? And evergreen, because again, the prevailing winds don't stop just because, seasons change. And then, so again, just graphics are much, much better. Where are the winds coming from? North here, rises in the east, sets in the west. So you're shading over here, the house, protecting from the northeast winds on that side, and that's part of that site analysis information. Is this even an issue for you? Is it something that needs to be part of your design? The answer may be no, but you got to check. Shading the house, again, know your plants. What does the canopy of your tree look like? You don't want a columnar tree for shade on a house. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't provide what you're trying to do. And then how far from the house does it need to be, to get that effect that you're doing, again, shading in the summer, the winter, the sun hits the house, and we've done that to some degree here, and we'll talk about that when we go out and look. These are the trellises in the courtyard. We didn't have room in there for trees. We've got dark red brick on this building. It absorbs a lot of heat. And one wall or the other of that courtyard is always in sun. So, you put the trellis up, you run some annual vines. That's a way to get that shade with space conservation here. Who's going to be doing the maintenance? This is something you need to think about when you're designing. And the way that this was really brought home to me, when we're designing curves in beds. Hello, are you making that curve so tight that you can't run a lawnmower around it? Or are you making that pathway so narrow you can't get a mower down it? Like with the demonstration gardens, we have to be very careful. The beds creak and they can't get the lawnmower down it, or can't cut certain areas. Yesterday we planted, if you drove in today, the forsythia along the chain link fence. I don't know if anybody noticed. They weren't there when you were here before. We just put those in yesterday. So after it was done, the farm manager comes to me. He says, Laurie, when you mulch it, mulch around that phone pole out there. Because there's not enough space between where the bed and the forsythia are to mow between that and the pole. The pole has to be incorporated in the bed with a curve gentle enough that the lawnmower can get around it. Because around here we mow with big zero-turn lawnmowers with big decks on them, okay? But who's going to be doing the maintenance? And that may significantly impact your design, because the best design in the world is doomed to failure if it is not maintained properly. Maybe you put in that lovely weeping cherry, but if they don't know any better, they're going to go in and prune it, and now it doesn't weep anymore. Hello? Maybe you want these beautiful trees, but a southern magnolia drops leaves that you either continually have to pick up because they don't degrade, they don't blow away. Maybe put a river birch in there. Or a tree with small leaves that degrade quickly or that blow away. So it's not such a thing. We've got a live oak and pines in my yard. I love the pine trees. It's free mulch. Hello? And the live oak sheds in the spring when the new growth pushes some of the old growth off, and I rake them once. I rake my yard 5 or 6 times a year, not because of any of the trees that are in my yard, but because of the oak trees that are in my neighbor's yard that drop leaves all winter, fall and winter long, So who's doing the maintenance, and is it something you want to do? Is it something they're capable of doing? For God's sake, don't plant hybrid tea roses in somebody's yard if they're not a gardener. That is like one of the high maintenance plants, and they're doomed to failure. All right, what's wrong with these plants? Nothing. Somebody's seen this picture before.
Yeah.
I know. Okay. Because it's a bald cypress and it looks like that when the leaves fall. And this is a loblolly pine, and you say, but it's got brown needles, but they're the old ones in the inner canopy that are falling off because they're not productive anymore. So nothing's wrong with the plants. On the other hand, sometimes we're our own worst enemy when it comes to plants and causing problems. And, you know, you have to plant a tree here because according to City of Chesapeake's ordinances, you have to have so many canopy trees per amount of parking spaces or parking space. But this is a car dealership and they don't want stuff dropping on their shiny cars.
Oh, wow.
So while they planted this sycamore, this is how they choose to maintain it.
That's
This
crazy.
is a Bradford pear tree. Hello, Bradford pear trees are Bradford pears because it's a cultivar that grows in a very specific shape. Why would you ever prune it that way? I mean, you know, so they've just really created major maintenance issues because it's a 20-year tree in the landscape before it starts falling apart structurally. And you can see that it's getting to be about that age. So why would you do this and create all these wounds and more stress on the tree? And now you've created a hazard for anybody that parks or walks in that area. Again, that evaluation, things have to leave landscapes periodically. Plants do have life expectancies. This is the beautiful white oak that was in the center of our parking lot back here. It wasn't a big deal when our parking lot was crush and run and it was porous. And everybody loved to park under the tree. But you can see the canopy dieback, and it's thinning up here. And when you go look, this is what happened. You can't fix it. You just can't. It has to leave. And it would have died anyway when we got the parking lot paved, because no tree could survive it. So some things just, it's time for them to go. And that's part of that assessment and evaluation. All right, so this is the landscape after about 10 years. Anyway, let's see, is there anything? Yep, okay, that's how you find me here. I'm not often in the office, but if you can catch me, because I tend to run at warp speed, I'm always happy to chat, answer questions, whatever. So I think it's time, yes, for your break. Yes. All right, so water quality is the next one on the agenda. Just so we're all on the same page, again, water is not an unlimited resource, and what we actually have available to us to use is a small percentage of what's out there. Most of it is, you know, salt water. The history for water protection. Anybody remember when the Cuyahoga River caught on fire? If you don't remember that, Google it. It's pretty cool. But that sort of brought to the forefront attention of how we had been disrespecting our waterways with lots of pollution and debris and whatnot. And so that was in like the late 60s, maybe 67 or 8, somewhere in there. So in 70, the EPA was created, Environmental Protection Agency. So this is the federal agency that is tasked with protecting human health and the environment. They write and enforce the regulations based on the laws that are passed by Congress. So what we're doing is starting with the big picture, and we're going to narrow the focus. After the EPA was created, then they come in with the Clean Water Act, and that is the cornerstone or the foundation, you'll hear it referred to different ways, of every water regulation since. It all started with this, and everything since is some sort of an amendment or tweak to it. So in 74, we added regulations about having safe drinking water supplies. And this was around standards. So a standard is a level that is identified or set, and that's what you compare everything else to determine, you know. So if you set a level for the highest, best quality of water, then you compare stuff to it, and it's either equal to or less than that quality level. But you got to have something to compare to decide how good it is. The Coastal Zone Act started dealing with non-point source pollution, and this is because, again, coastal zone, tourist industry, fishing industry, that sort of thing. The Clean Water Action Plan in the late 90s, they wanted everybody to feel warm and fuzzy, so they made an effort to involve citizens and engage citizens. In 2000, the Beach Clean Water Act Amendment
This affects us particularly because it instituted the monitoring and notification. So when we get notified in the summer that there's no swimming at a certain beach, it's because these things are monitored, especially for like fecal coliform, E. coli, things like that that might be in the water that if we were exposed to them would be harmful to us health-wise. Unfortunately, later on in like 2002, it's eye-opening realization that our water supply can be used as a weapon. And so we need to make sure that our water supplies are secure. And then in the late 2000s, what happened is I think Chesapeake Bay Foundation sued EPA and said, you guys aren't doing your job. The Chesapeake Bay is dying. So EPA said, okie dokie, because I think Chesapeake Bay Foundation won. So again, amendment, revamping of things, more public transparency about who's doing what and when and how and all of that. And oh, by the way, we're going to throw this little thing in here called the TMDLs. These again are standards, levels at which pollutants can be dumped into the Chesapeake Bay and the bay can kind of recover. And we're in way excess of what the science, this is all science-based, what the scientists say is a reasonable amount that the bay can recover from. So TMDL stands for total maximum daily load. Total maximum daily load. And we'll talk more about the specific pollutants that this the bay diet regulations involve. So water is cyclic, and it's important to understand this. There's water up in the atmosphere and it falls. And what it can do is recharge our surface water supplies, our oceans, lakes, streams, anything like that. It can also fall on the land, and in a natural environment, there's tree canopy layering, okay? Big trees, understory trees, shrubs, herbaceous plants, and ground covers. And so with that layering, a lot of the water is absorbed in those canopy layers and never reaches the ground. What reaches the ground is much gentler and tends to soak in instead of running off, okay? However, we come into the picture and do development and add impervious surfaces, which are surfaces that water cannot soak into. Roofs, driveways, streets, parking lots, all of that stuff. And if water can't soak in, it's got to go somewhere, so it runs off. And then it carries with it all the pollutants that are on the surfaces that it's running across. And that's where we're getting into trouble. And that's why they have the TMDLs. So, and then that water eventually makes its way back into our natural waterways. And again, the pollutants go with it. And then you've got evaporation, so water goes back up into the atmosphere, or you've got evapotranspiration, where it goes back up into the atmosphere through the plants, and then the cycle starts all over again. When water hits the ground and infiltrates, what it's doing is replenishing our groundwater supplies, which is our aquifers, which is what you tap into when you put a well down. Right, so we've gone from federal and the big picture of water. We're talking about the state of Virginia now. We do have a water control board, and we have laws written into the code for our state about water. And we have things like the anti-degradation policy. So if you have good, healthy water, high quality water, it is against the law to do anything that would degrade the quality. Illegal dumping, trash, pollution, whatever it is. And then, of course, we have our own set of quality standards. At the state level, the enforcement agency is the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, or DEQ. So you got EPA at the federal level, now you got DEQ. And then we have another layer, which is your locality, your municipality, whatever. So Norfolk. Right. All of us live in a watershed. Handout number 1. Just in case you didn't know that one existed. So a watershed is a geographic area of land. and all the water in that area, that land, all the runoff drains to a specific point. And the reason that watersheds are important is because that's how people look at stormwater management and stormwater planning and what they do in the landscape and how it impacts watersheds. Because we all live in one. The state has 9. Now this one over here drains, I think, to the Mississippi, and then there's a little bit of one down here that drains into the Albemarle Sound, if I'm not mistaken. But these are the state, and if you look, they kind of follow some of the bigger rivers, you know, and most of the state drains, you know, east to the Chesapeake Bay. And then these watersheds are then divided into sub-watersheds by county or city or things like that. So the thing is, we all live in a watershed, and what somebody does in another watershed can certainly impact you depending on where you are in the drainage pathway. The types of water that we deal with and talk about: surface water, of course, we just talked about that, lakes, streams, everything on the surface, groundwater or aquifers underground, and then stormwater. So this is the water that runs off that we have to deal with. OPW, other people's water, right? All right, the broader topics that we have to look at relative to water quality and managing it are the misuse of it and pollution. We have not been very good stewards of our water supplies. So we have point and non-point source pollution, and both types go where the water goes, whether it's leaching down into the soil or running off the surface. And then there's sediments and nutrients are the key pollutants that are regulated under the TMDLs, and there's a whole nother group called toxics that we will talk about. So point solution, let me see what the next slide is. Yep, okay. Point source pollution. This is a pollution from a specific point in time or source. Somebody is illegally dumping, you know, or there's an accident and the tanker truck turns over and all of it drains into off the highway into the stream. You can point at it and say, aha, that's what it is. And then you can do something about it, regulate it somehow. Fines, safety regulations, jail time, whatever. The non-point source pollution is the real booger. So the finger, you know, starts going around and then it starts coming back to all of us. I just realized, did you turn this on? Somebody turn the microphone on? I was gonna say, it's not for your purposes, it's for the recording purposes. So I don't know. Anyway, because I look down and usually there's a little green light. But non-point source pollution are the little things that everybody does that most people don't think make any difference. That doesn't matter. If the kid throws a food wrapper out of the car, or somebody flicks a cigarette butt out of the car, or you don't scoop the dog poop, or you're washing your car and you're doing it in the driveway, and all of the chemicals and all the stuff that's on the car and the chemicals you're using to wash the car, you know, detergents, you know, go down the driveway and hit the curb and run into the storm drain. So it's, you know, all of these things, you know, you put out fertilizer on your lawn and it gets on your sidewalks and you don't blow it back into the lawn and it dissolves and runs off and, you know, causes pollution. So how do you regulate that? Because what you're talking about is regulating people's behavior on little things that they don't think matter. And that's going to end up being a huge part of what you do as an Extension Master Gardener volunteer, helping people with information and understanding that everything that they do matters and makes a difference. Because collectively, all those little things add up and cause problems. And so collectively, all the little behavior changes will add up and become the solution. Anyway, so whatever the pollutant is, it goes where the water goes. Leaching, when water goes into the soil, it's called infiltration. When it carries pollutants, what it's doing is leaching them through the soil profile into the underground water supply. And then, of course, runoff is the horizontal movement over the surface. So pollution can have acute effects, which are things that happen almost immediate, or they can be cumulative over time. The sediments, the two that are regulated are sediments and nutrients. So organic and inorganic, those are the solid particles when your soil erodes or things like that. And then the nutrients, it used to be all about nitrogen because it's highly soluble and everything. But now it's more about phosphorus. Although phosphorus isn't as soluble, it hangs around a long time, and that can cause problems. So those are the two that are regulated. The ones that are not, at least for us here, they may be regulated somewhere else, or that we may have regulations on these in the future. Things like pesticides, oil, gas, and heavy metals from manufacturing, but especially from vehicles. Aquatic weeds can be considered pollutants. Trash, overflowing sewage. Again, I was at a conference and somebody was talking about stormwater, and a big issue in infrastructure design. Your older cities, your stormwater and your sewer systems are the same system. So if your sewer system is handling stuff and you get a deluge that dumps, millions and millions of gallons of water into that, you will get overflow. Most more recently developed cities, the systems are separate. Your sewer system is a closed system that goes from where the waste is generated to the treatment plant. The storm system, and that's why it's so important, is separate, and wherever the water is coming from and what it's carrying goes into the system and then immediately goes into the natural waterways. There's no treatment of it. We talked about pathogens like E. coli, fecal coliform, things like that in the water when you don't scoop the poop. And then another one that I had to add to the list is pharmaceuticals. A lot of people take a lot of pills, and it's a lot of complicated chemistries and chemicals. And so it goes through our body, it gets into the waste system, goes to the treatment plant, but they're not designed to handle all these complicated chemistries. And a lot of these things don't break down. And so they make it through the treatment process and then are released back into our natural waterways, and can cause harmful things like, I don't know, frogs with 10 legs or something. So that's one of the things that is being looked at more closely now, is the pharmaceutical trail. Right, so a picture's worth 1,000 words. These are sediment plumes, and this is sort of like the train wreck kind of effect. What happens is upstream on these watersheds up here, different activities. Somebody didn't put up a sediment and erosion control fence at a construction site. Somebody didn't reseed their lawn and there's bare spots and the soil's washing away. Whatever it is. Somebody didn't stabilize the shoreline, and the bank got undercut and caved in, and all that's now in. All these little things, and then it all drains to this waterway, and then it just keeps getting added more and more and more, and then it comes on down here, and here's the plume coming out. Whoosh! So the bigger, heavier particles settle out more quickly, closer to the shoreline. Well, that creates more shallow water, and shallow water warms up faster. And then when you combine it with the nutrients that are running off, then that creates a perfect environment for weeds. And then the fine particles whoosh out further, and they stay suspended for a longer period of time, which means sunlight can't penetrate the water. And there's underwater vegetation. Eventually the particles do settle out, but then they've coated that underwater vegetation. So it's just like us putting on sunscreen. Although the sunlight can penetrate the water, the plants, it doesn't penetrate their leaves because they've got this coating of fine sediment, and now they can't photosynthesize. If they can't photosynthesize, they're not putting oxygen in the water, and they're eventually going to die. Well, when they die, the creatures that need the oxygen or need their vegetation for food or for habitat, they're out of luck, right? They either die, or if they can, they migrate to another location. So that's kind of that whole train wreck thing. You say, well, we'll just plant more underwater grasses. Well, yeah, sure. But what happens the next time there's another one of these? You're right back where you started from. So it's a vicious cycle, and it's a good lesson in all the little actions that then collectively add up to create the problem. And you see these a lot after large rain events, hurricanes, nor'easters, that sort of thing. All right, the same thing happens, same train wreck situation with the nutrients, the nitrogen and the phosphorus. So again, little more is better, right? So let's put another whole bag of fertilizer on our lawn or something. Plants can only take up so much of the nutrients at a time and utilize them. So more is not better, more is wasteful. It's wasting your time, your money, your effort. It's wasting nutrients going out into the environment, becoming a pollution issue because they have to go somewhere. The plants can't use them, then where do they go? So again, they dissolve and follow the water. And what you have with nutrients, excess nutrients in the system, are these algal blooms. Yes. Because they don't want to tell you that you're the problem. Seriously. So hold that thought. So we have algae in our water here in Hampton Roads year round. Algae is ubiquitous. It's everywhere all the time. The problem is when it gets out of balance, and it gets out of balance in the spring. So what have you got going on in the spring? Everybody's starting to fertilize stuff, okay? The water is starting to warm up. And so you're providing nutrients and you're providing an ideal growing environment. So algae is naturally going to proliferate, and it does that very, very quickly, okay? But adding the nutrients exacerbates the problem. And you can have algae where the water looks off color and cloudy. You can have it where it looks like it's growing up from the bottom. And then you can also have it in these mats that are very dense and kind of free flow. And then what happens is at some point the nutrients decrease and the algae doesn't have all of that nutrition anymore, so it starts dying off. How fast it dies off is the problem. So when you have this big bloom, like if everything is 100% covered, then it starts dying off. When it dies off, it uses oxygen in that decay process, and it gets the oxygen out of the water. So then you get dead fish. They suffocate. There's no oxygen. Algae covering the water also changes water temperatures and changes water oxygen levels and changes water pH. So it really messes up the balance of the aquatic ecosystem. So when you see dead fish, people say, oh, you went sprayed something and killed the fish, some chemical or something. It's a system that's out of balance, and you have stolen the oxygen out of the water that the fish need to support the die-off of the algae. So your situation, the city's not going to do anything about it. I'll tell you that right now. One of the best things, and you can use your status as a master gardener, is who all lives, and it's not just people that live on the water, it's the whole neighborhood, because everybody's yards drain into that. Gee, wouldn't you like to learn how to do a soil test? You know, we'll tell you, we'll give you the stuff, we'll interpret the results when it comes back. Don't you want to have beautiful lawns with less effort and less fertilizer, less cost, you know, that sort of thing. It's an educational process. You have to connect what's going on in their landscape to getting them interested. Some people will do it because it's a feel-good thing. Some people will do it because it saves money, time, or effort. And then that will be nutrient reduction, which then will impact the amount of algae. Right. Right. So then you know, target your audiences. But anyway, so part of it is making that connectivity and then making that one behavior change that might make a difference. But yeah, that's a common problem, because then I get the phone call, what do we spray to get rid of it? Well, I can tell you that and it'll go away for a couple of weeks, but then it's going to come right back because you haven't solved the problem. Oh yeah, because your water temperature, it gets below a certain point, and then yeah, it dies off big time. So, right, how bad a pollutant is depends on a couple of things. How long does it stay around? before it breaks down into harmless components. So how long does it persist? How easy does it dissolve? The more easily it dissolves, then the more easily it's going to move when you have runoff. And then how is it inactivated? And there's different processes. So sunlight could break it down. You know, we've all left like toys or tools and stuff out in the yard, and sunlight has made it brittle. It can change form. It can go from a liquid to a gas. When it does that, there are chemical reactions that occur when you change forms, and those reactions then could break down the components. You can ab and adsorb it. So absorbing is like if it's dissolved in the water and the plant roots absorb it into the plant. They're taking it into the plant, okay? And now it's in the plant and it's not out there in the water, and you've deactivated it by removing it from the system and locking it up in the plant. You can adsorb it. That's I like to think Velcro when you think adsorb. So you've got, you know, soil particles, organic matter particles, and you've got the pollution particles, and particles or molecules or whatever you want to call them have charges. And so when they are attracted to each other, so you take the pollution one and the soil particle and it gets added. And when you have added it to that soil particle and that soil particle stays where it is, then it's no longer a problem. You've essentially tied it up and made it immobile. So that's adsorption. The soil is probably one of the most complicated systems to research because there's so much going on. You've got pH, you've got nutrients, minerals, different types of soil particles, all kinds of bacteria and fungi and insects and everything that lives in the soil, and everything. So there's a lot of chemical reactions continually going on in the soil. And so a lot of times those will deactivate the pollutants into harmless components. You also have biological degradation. So the best example of this would be when they had the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, and they were out there putting out oil-eating algae, right? So the algae was a biological organism that would then eat or break down oil molecules. So that's biological degradation. And then it's crop removal. If you've absorbed something into the plant and then you harvest the plant and take it away, you've taken away whatever the pollutant is. And an example of that would be, I think it's brake ferns that are planted on mining sites, because arsenic is a byproduct of mining and that contaminates the soil. When it is dissolved in water, then the plants absorb it and stockpile it inside the plant. Then you can harvest those plants and take them away. All right, those standards that we talked about, there's a lot of different ones. It depends on who you talk to. We all have them. You go over to that faucet there and get a glass of water. Okay? You don't want it to smell bad. You don't want stuff floating around in it, right? So those are things that standards that we have ourselves, but there's a lot of other things. How much salt is in it, how the pathogens, the amount of oxygen, all of that is how much life the water will support, those types of things. So it depends on who you're talking to as to what they're looking at to decide whether or not water is good quality. All right, here's the distribution of watersheds across the state. And what you really need to look at is, all right, this is where the highest quality water is, this bright green. So where do you see that on the map? Eastern Shore and the mountains. Now, what do those two places have in common? They're remote. They are not highly developed, okay? And then the most impaired are these yellow and tan areas, and where are they? Okay, you got Northern Virginia, you get Richmond, you got like, what is that, Roanoke over here. And then of course here, because that's the end of the line, right? Everything that everybody's doing in the watersheds is coming across the state, and we're at the end of the line. So of course it is. So what this shows is the big watersheds and then all of the little sub watersheds. And you may have, you know, water that runs from here to here, And
So
maybe
and that's maybe
picture
Tuesday I should
an
get it.
okay here and four here.
Generally, when you have on.
You know, where is it along that water pathway
But my niece and
that,
nephew
that there's a problem? And are we inheriting other people's problems downstream? So that's sort of the bigger picture concepts and things. Let's take a look a little more specific about what we can do. So misuse and waste and stormwater. There have been a lot of studies done about the amount of water we use and use it for what. And the problem is that a lot of it's used for outdoor purposes, irrigating lawns and things like that. And they estimate that about 50% of that is wasted. We're not using that water efficiently. Hello, who drove down the road the other day when it was raining and saw somebody's irrigation system? You know, come on. And the big problem with that too is most irrigation systems are hooked up to city water, which means they're using potable water to irrigate with, and they're paying for it. So being more efficient in how we're using the water resources. And then the reality is, you know, here in Virginia, we don't have water restrictions very often. Every now and then, but we are blessed to have a reasonable amount of rainfall and have it reasonably spaced over a calendar year. And then when we do have restrictions, they're not for very long, they go away eventually. But there are other parts of the country where it's not the case. The water restrictions have come and now they are permanent. You know, when you talk about only having 7 days of drinking water left in your reservoir for people in California, you better not be washing your car or watering your lawn. So, you know, those types of things. And just because all those reservoirs are full now from the atmospheric rivers doesn't mean they're not going to have the problem again at some point. So learning and you know, modifying our behavior is important here. So we can do that by being smart about how we design landscapes and use water in the landscapes. We can make that connection and the understanding, like, you know, if you have healthy soil, then that supports healthy plants, then they're less needy. They're less likely to need irrigation. If we have irrigation systems, we can be smart about how we use them. We could turn them off in the winter or cycle them down. I guarantee you probably half the people in my neighborhood that have irrigation systems never change the settings. They're putting out the same amount of water in December that they're putting out in July. Hello, the plants are dormant. They're not using it. Why are you putting it out there and paying for it? Managing our nutrients better, because again, we don't want to create pollution, and then managing our runoff. And again, it's little things that collectively make that impact and solve the problem.
So I'm not sure.
So a couple
But
of things.
we're not like
Another
those
handout. Ta-da! This should be the last page in your water quality chapter. But I gave you a copy of it anyway.
For me to wait.
Remember I talked about landscape analysis?
Well, Linda Oligrum called me yesterday.
Well, this is a
and you
landscape
probably didn't know her
analysis
well, but she's
tool,
got
but it's from a
care.
water perspective.
And
You walk through your landscape,
she's had foot surgery, so
and,
she hasn't been around too much
you look at
stuff
this list
lately.
of things,
But she had some books.
and you
so the
just
book
put
said she
a
didn't
mark
know
in the plus or the
where
minus
to take
column.
them or what to
You know,
take
so
them.
you're walking in
And
here
I
and you go,
said,
soil. I got good
well,
drainage.
Pam,
Put a check in the
call
plus
Pam.
column.
And she's
Or,
collecting
you know,
books, and she said she might come out
fertilizer.
and get them. I said,
I'm
"They're
using
not all-"
highly soluble, you know, nitrogen.
And so she emailed
Not
me
slow release. Maybe I put a check in the minus column for that.
She left a message
What
for
this does
me,
is it
and,
gives you a tool to help you gather information.
and
And when you're done,
and this literally
you can
sitting
add other
there on the
categories
flipping
too. You can take this and
Facebook,
make it your own.
And there's first thing that
Do whatever
popped
you
up.
want to.
She's another
Hopefully
one.
you've got more marks in the
Yeah,
plus
but-
column than the minus
And I'm
column.
going,
Okay.
I guess.
But what it does
I guess
is you
we're not
look
gonna
at what's in the
find that.
minus column and you say,
When
is there
does-
something I can do
I'll go.
to make it better?
Oh, I have no clue. I didn't know she
Move
was
that
gone.
mark into the plus column. But it gives you a way of looking at what's going on in the landscape and helping you focus on what might be able to be done better or differently. Okay. And the reason is, if you look at the top, it asks you your total property, and then it asks you the square footage of impervious surface.
Yeah, you probably don't use
do
your
the-
Wi-Fi.
do the
I don't know
math,
who all
come
uses
up
the
with a
Wi-Fi
number.
in the DC
And it's
office,
just a
but,
data point. It's just a number. There's no right or wrong answer. But this takes on a whole new significance
So I think
if
the system they installed here
35% of your
yesterday
property
was
is
great.
impervious
You have to
or
register as a
70% of it
guest and they
is
email you a
impervious.
temporary
If
password.
you
and
got
have to go
anything
in
over
and change it
50%,
to a real
this
password.
becomes really
It's
important.
good for 24
And how
hours.
you look at what's
Only
done
good
in
for
the
24
landscape and how it then manages the
Yeah.
runoff.
Well, I had
Okay.
to use a hotspot
So
for
it's
my
just a tool.
iPad just to get my
There are also
email, to
tools
get the
online, runoff
temporary
calculators. And I'll show you an
password
example of
to put
that where you
in.
can plug in information about
The
your
Wi-Fi
property
is always
and it'll
has been the
estimate
same
the amount of
here as
runoff coming
there.
off the property.
So,
And then you say, okay,
whereas it
what if
used
I
to
want to
be
put in a
city
rain barrel
gas, this
or a
new
rain
is
garden or something
cows
like that? And you plug it
gas,
back in and then it'll calculate.
agricultural
It's a way
sciences
to
were
help
just the
you
parent.
see where
Mhm,
you
and
can get the best
so,
return on
for
whatever
those things,
investment you're making
I'm
in managing stormwater. Reducing impervious surfaces, we'll talk a little
not
bit more
sure.
about
I
that.
may
But
have. I
we're
thought
not
it
going to get rid of our roofs and our driveways and things like that. So the reality of the situation is, if you're not going to reduce
what
the
is it?
overall square footage of impervious surface,
Oh,
how do you moderate
well, I
what's running
hit
off
on
of
it.
it?
I did hit up this
And then again, those
no,
checks and
but
evaluations
I did
as
hit
you're
on
out
a
in your
page
landscape, looking at
with some
things.
information that was
It's how you think about
different,
things and look at things in a
making me
little
think
different
I
light.
got.
Because again, landscapes change. So again, here's the back, and I don't have to go
I
through all
was
the
in on something
explain all
that I'd
this
never
again,
seen before.
right?
That led me to believe maybe I was in there.
But after we regraded, then all of these circles are additional things that we did, individual little things. So for instance, we stabilized the slope over here. We planted extra tree canopy layers. We put protection around the storm drain. We created those swales. We put our trellises up for passive solar heating, cooling, and put a couple small trees in to try and get some canopy. We spread the water out so that it wasn't concentrated in one area. So all of these different little things. Right. So there's the landscape analysis tool. This is a runoff calculator. James River Association, which is up on the peninsula. If you actually, it's through the Timmins group. But if you just go to your Google machine and say, residential runoff calculator or something, different things will pop up. The EPA has a site. It may be up and running now. It wasn't last time I checked. But anyway. All right, we all know healthy soil means healthy plants, and healthy plants are less needy from a water standpoint. So do your soil testing every few years. Make sure you've got aerated soils, not compacted soils that don't let water infiltrate. Cover up that bare ground with mulch or ground covers or something. Put the right plant in the right place and get it established quickly so that it will thrive and not need a lot of water. Group your plants by their watering zones. Impatiens do not require the same amount of water or require more water than prickly pear cactus. Don't plant them side by side. They're not going to be happy, either one of them, with whatever you're doing water-wise. Do those canopy layers to slow the water down. Spread it out. Soak it in. And then be careful what maintenance practices. Don't top your crepe myrtles. You're taking the whole canopy of the tree away. For stormwater management.
And I said,
so again, soil test,
like a Google
very
form
good
evaluation
baseline
like we're using
information.
for the
And there's
class
a
or
really
whatever.
great handout
had
that
me do
tells
for
you how to
open
interpret this, because
You'd get
that's scary.
instant
Somebody gets a
data,
soil
and
test.
it would be
What
already
does this
tabulated
mean?
for you.
Well,
Everybody's like,
every
oh,
soil
that's
test they give you, they should give you
those
that
people.
handout that goes
well, it would
over
be
each
easy to put
category and explains it and why it's important. And then, of course, the aeration for the air and the water in the pore spaces there.
Something like that where they can put it.
Sure.
When you go to the form, they make it simple, they fill it out, and then you've got data.
Then they have this big water pool,
It's not new. That started probably about 25, 30 years ago. It's called a stormwater retention pond. And so we'll talk about more in a minute, but it's a pond that is meant to handle the stormwater off of that site. Whether it's a residential development or a school or a shopping center or whatever. It's just a big hole in the ground that holds water temporarily until it can soak in or evaporate.
That's where Ziggy's coming from.
Okay? And whatever is going on in that aquatic ecosystem is supposed to clean the water up.
No.
And then what happens is in the next storm event, polluted water flows in, the water that's in the pond that's supposed to be clean then gets pushed out back into our natural waterways. So it's a temporary holding and cleaning, but it's expensive because it takes up land. And it's a liability issue, which is why they're often fenced in, and it's a maintenance nightmare. So we'll talk about other things besides that. They're kind of going out of favor now, looking at other things that can be done in a landscape to manage stormwater. All right, so
At the
in your
protege.
locality, find out if there are incentive programs. I think Norfolk has something called Retain the Rain.
They may be decided.
So they may, they may have reduced costs for rain barrels, or, they'll give you one and come help you set it up to rainwater harvest, or they may, pay you to reduce the amount of turf in your landscape and put in other plants. And these programs come and go. Different localities have different ones. There's the Virginia Soil VCAP, Virginia Conservation Assistance Program. They may help offset the cost of getting a design and installing a stormwater practice like permeable paving or rain garden or something. So there's different programs out there to offset costs of doing some of this. Find out about them, because this is a compacted lawn area that is growing more weeds than grass, and look, it's just running off, just like it's an impervious surface. So find out what's out there and available, because I can guarantee you're going to get the question, sure, I want to do this, I don't want to do it myself, who's going to do it? Or, is there somebody that can help offset the cost? The right plant in the right place, we talked about hardiness zones, but that's about the site analysis, what's going on, what's going to work best in that site.
See what somebody responded and what they said.
How you utilize the different spaces in your landscape. The front yard, the most public facing, is the highest maintenance and highest aesthetic level. Does it all have to be turf? And then moderate water and maintenance would be like your private space, and then your service areas or work areas would be the least amount of maintenance and care relative to water. Plant things correctly. Something as simple as, and you can't assume people know the most basic information. I made an assumption once that master gardeners knew how to plant plants.
He still uses a foot fence.
I was wrong. But anyway, when I do work with different volunteer groups and we're out on site and you don't know where people are coming from and what their experiences are, don't assume that they know the simplest information, okay? So, we joke and we say, okay, Laurie's going to give you the 30-second planting. Green side up, all right? And then, no root balls sticking out of the ground, because that's just going to wick and dry out your plant. Don't plant them deep either, because you're fluffing up the soil when you dig the hole, and it's going to sink back down a little bit. Don't dig the little hole and then jam it down there. You need a bigger hole. Things like that. Give the plant the best chance to get established and to thrive. And just, and people don't think that connects to water quality.
And of course, we all live through
the connection.
Punch.
As far as irrigation systems are concerned, first thing I ask is, do you even need one? This Sustainable Landscape Practices garden, from day one, we knew we were never going to have an irrigation system in this garden. So what did that mean for us? If you have a system, are you using it appropriately? Is it efficient? Are the heads putting out water in the right patterns and getting everything watered that needs it? I walked the dogs in the neighborhood the other day, and irrigation system, and I'm like, I hear it, but I don't see it. And I went over to the yard and I looked, and here's the head popped up, and it's spraying into a Yopon holly this big. So it was fine when the Yopon holly was this big, but they had never adjusted the irrigation system to compensate for the landscape maturing. And so it was just watering that one plant, which had,
Some project leaders are
tail
just
on it because it was so
completing the new
stressed out from
formats
getting all this
and-
water that it never needed.
It's
And the rest of the stuff in that area that should have been getting water wasn't.
Especially the evaluation.
So, making sure your
So,
system is working efficiently.
And I think in every
Um,
conversation, something comes up.
And if you ever want
about
an eye-opening
key work.
education, just go look at the array of irrigation nozzles out
and
there
that's
right
nice.
now. I
And then
mean,
she
they can
found
put
the
water
number,
out
which
in those
actually
little
doesn't make that
skinny
much, which
areas
helps
between
me
the
some.
sidewalk and the curb.
And,
I mean, wherever it is. And then
and I
maybe you
think the
need an
QR code
adaptable
that's on the
system.
flyer,
Maybe you
that
need
just
it
takes you to
zoned
web
so
page.
that the trees and shrubs,
Just
once they're
like that.
established,
That's all
that
they
part of
do.
the system
And
gets
yes.
turned off and
And
only used on an as-needed basis. Your turf and your annual plants,
Knowing
which
that there
require the
are
most
some
water,
groups that
are what
I
runs
don't
the
want
most
to
frequently. Or maybe you hybridize and you've got some areas that are drip and some that are overhead. Overhead irrigation is the most wasteful
And there's
because
probably
it
some
shoots
use
water
that,
into the
which I
air
don't want to think about,
and
but
it has more of a chance of evaporating than it does getting into the ground. But then also it gets on your plant foliage over and over again, and that makes plants more susceptible to disease problems. For God's sake, go buy a rain sensor and hook it up to your system so it turns off when we have natural rainfall. That's just common sense. And cycle your system down in the fall or winterize it and turn it off because plants aren't actively growing. They don't need that much water. So regular inspection and maintenance is important. If you've got a landscape maintenance company, you need to go check your irrigation system when they leave, because I can't tell you how many of my neighbors have these people zipping around on these lawnmowers at warp speed, and then they're gone. I mean, literally, it takes this company. We timed them. It's 3 guys. One's on a mower, one's on a weed eater, and one's got a blower. And from the time they pull up and get that lawnmower off of the trailer of the truck to the time they leave is exactly 20 minutes. And then, and zipping around at warp speed on that lawnmower, they don't know that they've hit the irrigation head and busted it. That's what you find out when you get the $500 water bill. So check things. And then maybe there's alternatives that you could use, because this is not acceptable, okay?
No, because some of those.
So these would be our alternatives, like watering bags.
Yeah, we should look into that. 'Cause we're getting
So,
that.
there's a hole here and
We're
there's
not
a
a
plug
501c3.
here, and you just fill the bag up, and
So
it's got
so I
emitters
don't
on the
know
bottom
what they want,
that the
what they
water
want to
oozes
have.
out
all of my
over
Google
time, like a day or
experience
so.
School
And it keeps the root ball moist until that tree gets established. Then you just unzip it or unfold it and put it on a new tree that you've planted.
Really starting like 10
I was going to say the neat story about and how I learned about this one.
Your homework.
Atlanta, prior to the Olympics, okay, they wanted to green the city. Well, my contention is if you're going to green the city, you need to start 10 to 15 years ahead of the event. But they planted hundreds and thousands of trees in the city, gator bagged them all. They had water trucks running 7 days a week, a different section of the city every day, so that those bags got filled up once a week, so that the trees were alive when the Olympics. Then, they took all the bags away right before the Olympics, but the trees were alive.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And then, of course, they never put the
Yeah, in
bags
the
back,
space,
and
although I wanna
some
talk
trees
about-
made it and some
I don't want
didn't.
to-
So that's how I found out about those particular
It needs
ones.
to be deleted, but I want a policy about what.
Nutrient management, again, soil and water testing is
Probably
important.
can go on and get things flashes up.
And
that says-
I say water testing because I had a call from a lady in Chesapeake.
Well, and also
Her whole landscape was dying. I said, really? Everything? Turf? Yeah. All my ornamental plants? Yeah. Trees and shrubs? Yeah. Okay, well, bing, bing, bing. That tells you right there that's a major environmental problem. Not a insect or disease or something like that. Because most insect disease don't cross species very much. So come to find out, when she did the water test, she was irrigating from well water. She'd had saltwater intrusion into the well. Plants don't like to be irrigated with salt water. So she ended up having to hybridize her irrigation system so that she could irrigate a couple of times with the well water, but then she would have to have a period where she irrigated with potable city water to kind of flush things out or wash the salt off the plants. So anyway, What type of fertilizer are you using? Our recommendations now for our tech and extension are for controlled or slow release fertilizers. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But what they do is provide a slow, even, steady nutrient supply over time, as opposed to highly soluble products, which once they dissolve and are in solution, that's only available for the plants to take it up for a short time, and then it goes somewhere else. So,
And they're probably stored in your Google.
synthetic versus organic products, you will always use more of the organic product because the percentages of nutrients in those products is lower.
You could probably dump.
And then there's other sources in the landscape too that you might need to take into consideration for nutrients.
Oh,
So the testing, you got that. There are charts out there that talk about different products, what the nutrient analysis is, how quickly it works. Does it have an impact on your soil? If we have sort of pretty much acidic soils here in coastal Virginia anyway, do you really want to use a product that makes them more acidic? So know what products you're dealing with. And then if you can't do fertilizer math, there are, I'm a plant person, I'm not a math person, and I admit it. So fertilizer math, I can do it, but not when somebody's watching me under pressure. Right? I have to think things through. So there's calculators that you can use. You know, you plug in which product, because Extension recommends things in pounds or whatever of nutrients, and you just don't go buy 10 pounds of nitrogen, right? You buy a product that has nitrogen in it. So you have to do that calculation to say, okay, if I need X amount of nitrogen, like here, number of pounds of fertilizer to get 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. That's a fairly standard recommendation for nitrogen, okay? And landscapes, it's per 1,000 square feet. Larger properties, it's per acre. But you have to decide, you know, I need a pound of nitrogen, and you know, there's 33% nitrogen in this product, so how much of this product do I need to get that 1 pound of nitrogen? So there's some calculations involved there, but fertilizer calculators online are fabulous. The slower controlled release. So these are what are called prills. They're like little spheres, and they have a shell on them, and the nutrients are inside. The nutrients, as this shell breaks down over time, the nutrients come out and are available to the plant. It's much better to have slow and steady over time. It's less likely to become a pollution issue with these types of fertilizers. Now, you may pay a pretty penny up front for a bag, but I can make a bag last 5 years in my yard, because you really only need to put it down once, because the most common ones last for 3 to 4 months, and that's the growing season, and you don't need any more after that, right? So, and you can spread them, you know, just like you do with grass seed and stuff. If that's not what you need, either in the planting hole or in the planting bed, you know, you can do a liquid or a foliar application, which is a quicker. All right, another train wreck here. So people like to see the geese. They feed the geese. The geese stay. They don't migrate anymore. They reproduce. They overpopulate. They eat all the vegetation. They trample and compact the soil. Now you've got all this stuff eroding into your stormwater pond, and you're calling me about the algae problems. And in the meantime, you know, you're getting fined because you built a fence to keep them out of your yard, and that's against the property covenants. And, you know, it just gets train wreck. But there are other sources of nutrients in the landscape. Don't let it be these guys, because, you know, it's eroding and they're pooping in there and all that stuff. If you want to have some fun on a day you don't have anything else to do, go online and look at scooping the poop. I mean, there are like neighborhood wars that go on. People catching people on their doorbell cameras and stuff like that. I'm here to tell you, I don't think this is possible. We tried with our puppies and it just didn't work. There are all kinds of stormwater practices that you can use in the landscape. Sometimes they're called BMPs, best management practices. Sometimes they're called SMPs, which is stormwater management practices. But again, once you have a concept of managing stormwater, there are all different kinds of things that you can do in the landscape. So 6 of your handouts are on the 6 most common practices that are used in residential landscapes. So use those extension handouts. They're good for you. They're good to give to people. When you go to the VCE website, you need to type in stormwater and homeowner. There's another series of extension pubs by Dr. David Sample, who is our stormwater engineer. There's like 18 of those. But those are things that are used on commercial sites or by landscape and engineers, stormwater engineers, design professionals. And a lot of those will never, ever be applied to residential landscapes. So use the one that's geared towards your homeowner audience, because that's who you're going to be dealing with the most. And there are all kinds of practices. So let's look at a few things. So this is just a different graphic, a different way to look at stormwater. And I spend a lot of time on stormwater because it is one of the most frequently asked questions in extension. So in a natural area, you get rainfall, things evapotranspire back up through the plants into the atmosphere, a little bit of runoff, you get about 50% of it infiltrates, okay? As we come into these urban developed areas that have a lot of impervious surfaces, this is actually wrong. You have to have something green for it to evapotranspire. Otherwise, it's just evaporation, okay? Because there's nothing green in that picture. Look at how much the runoff jumps up. And then very little infiltration because the water can't go through those surfaces. Rooftop redirect. It's as simple as taking your downspout and running it into a stormwater practice, or running it out into the landscape. Or, you know, this is running it into a storm drain and some conservation landscaping here. You just disconnect it or redirect it from running it directly into a storm drain. It's just that simple. Rain gardens. All right, here you go. You got my last copies. So we have a extension pub on rain gardens, but this is sort of the best definitive, most comprehensive pub that we've got from the Department of Forestry. It walks you through the entire process, okay, of site analysis, doing a perk test to make sure you've got drainage, to how to size the rain garden, to what plants to put in it. So when you talk to people about concepts that might be new to them, you have to connect with them somehow. So the elevator speech for rain gardens. How do you tell somebody what a rain garden is from when you walk on ground floor before you get to the 3rd floor in the elevator, right? Okay, doors are closing. Rain gardens. A puddle with plants, period. Y'all understand what a rain garden is now, right? Seriously, because everybody knows what a puddle is. It's a shallow depression that holds water after a storm, and the water either soaks in the ground or evaporates back in the atmosphere, right? Now you're adding plants for biofiltration. Now you got a rain garden. Okay, so it's the way that we think about and present things. So rain gardens, you have 3 planting zones, of course. The lowest stays wettest longest. So this gives you an opportunity to look at different plant palette here. You want the water to be there a short period of time, because you're not making a water garden or bog garden, okay? And you don't want to start breeding mosquitoes at 7 days. So you've got to have the drainage. The water has to move somewhere. To make it worth doing, from an effort and a cost standpoint and a positive impact on stormwater management standpoint, you need about 5% of your drainage area to go into it. And that's not a big deal. So if you got a roof and you got 4 downspouts, 1 on each corner, and you run 1 downspout into the rain garden, that's 25% of that impervious surface, okay? And again, they're only meant to be 6 to 8 inches deep. They're shallow. You're trying to spread the water out, soak it in. Swales, we talked about swales, you know, again, people know what a ditch is. So you know what a ditch is. Okay, well, fine. A swale moves water from point A to point B, but it's shallow and wide. Gives the water time to slow down, spread out, soak in, evaporate, or get absorbed by the plants. Oftentimes, swales are between buildings that are close together because you're grading so that water runs away from the foundation. So your swale runs right down the middle here. Sometimes in communities where you don't have curb and gutter, that's what you see. And then if your property, your structure is on the down slope, everything coming down this hill, swales, it hits the swale and then is diverted into these side swales. So it doesn't run into your structure. So that's what a swale does. Rainwater harvesting. So this is, taking the runoff off of your roof, because that is the cleanest runoff. Even though there's stuff on your roof, it's still cleaner than if it's running across a parking lot or the landscape. And then holding that water temporarily and then using it at a later point, not 2 weeks later. You really need to use it reasonably soon, because eventually we're going to have another storm event. And again, the reality is if you have a 1,000 square foot roof and a half an inch of rain, you're generating 600 gallons of water. How big are these barrels? They're generally 50 to 80. That's why you get this, rainwater harvesting for the obsessive compulsive person here. This is the sci-fi geek or the comedian or the artiste, So, but I will tell you a couple of things about rainwater. Use it. Don't let it sit there forever. Sometimes you have HOAs or other civic leagues or something where you can't have rain barrels, at least not visibly. So make sure you don't put something in and then be in violation of something. One barrel is rarely enough. Usually you need one or more than one. And then you always have to have an overflow plan. So see, it's coming down here and filling up this barrel, and then it fills up all these. But this is, eventually it's going to back up and overflow. So that backs it up into here, and it goes back down into here, and then that goes somewhere else. Okay, so have an overflow plan. And you got to have an overflow plan for the rain garden too. Okay. Permeable paving. This is what it really looks like. It's expensive. We don't have a lot of it for two reasons. Well, not one here in coastal Virginia. There's not a lot of room between the surface and the top of our water table. And permeable paving has to go down fairly deep, because what you're doing is creating lasagna, these different layers of stone, and that acts as a storage reservoir. So that when the stormwater goes through the top up here, it's stored in here temporarily till it can soak into the ground, or if it gets to be too much, there's an underdrain here that will connect to the stormwater system. But on a residential scale, we can do different things. Things like these big block here in the driveway. This is just using different brick and stone and pea gravel here in a little courtyard area to let water go through. The old 2-tire track driveway system is coming back in style. They say everything does if you wait long enough. And then permeable concrete or asphalt. They take the fines out. The fines are the small particles. And when they make it, they take those out, which means that there's pore space that the water then goes through. So you'll see this a lot in like school parking lots, things like that. The problem with permeable paving that's done like this or like this is you have to vacuum it. That's the second reason that we don't see a lot of it. Americans cannot wrap their heads around vacuuming pavement. They do it all the time in Europe. That picture I showed you of Wageningen, that landscape, there's a vacuum truck through there about once a week. But it's to keep the organic matter and debris from clogging the pore spaces so that water continues to infiltrate. So if you want a niche business, start up a vacuuming permeable pavement. Seriously. Drain chains, that's just one way that you can slow the water down. It just takes the place of your downspout, not your gutters. Water's still running off of your roofs, but you can run it, into a flower bed, into a water garden, into a rain barrel, into a dry well situation. You can make your own or buy them. So buffers, come in all shapes and sizes, but basically a buffer is the vegetation that is adjacent right here to the shoreline. So what it does is anything that's running off upslope hits this buffer and the sediment drops out and the nutrients and other pollutants get absorbed or broken down by the vegetation. And then any water that makes it through that buffer into the receiving body of water is cleaner. So that's the whole point there. They can be very ornamental. This is Bayville Golf Club down here off Shore Drive. They use their roughs as sort of their buffers. And then to change views as they go around the golf course, some of the buffers are treed as opposed to grassed. And then this is the brackish water, the Spartina grass that's down in the canal there. And then this is our buffer here around our stormwater pond. We put in some core logs here. Core is coconut fiber. It's biodegradable. This was a year that we were down 13 inches on rainfall. So the pond is down. So this core is actually at where the normal water level of our pond would be. So we took advantage of that. You can see all the debris that had gotten in here and the bank had eroded. We dug all this out, threw it back up after we put the core log down. We didn't want it to, slide back down into the pond again. Then we planted heavily. And, in about 3 years, you never know this is there. It's degraded away and the plants now stabilize the slope. Canopy layers are so critical. If you've got somebody that does Speakers Bureau on trees and the value of trees, I've got a great presentation if you don't, that I'm happy to give you. But looking at the value of trees from a stormwater, property value, and carbon sequestration, air cleaning, all of that, there's a calculator that will break all that down. You just go out, identify the tree species, measure it at 4 feet above ground, plug it in, and it'll tell you. And if you want figures on the value of tree canopies, New York City, street trees, over 5 million of them, they estimate the stormwater management value at about $61 a tree. It really varies a little bit based on species. And then you add that up, oh my God, that's money that those trees are saving the city, money that people aren't having to pay in stormwater fees. So you better believe it's an asset that they manage. Things like floating treatment wetlands, keeping yourself up to date on newer technologies. We all know the value of wetlands, but wetlands don't grow everywhere, right? They just don't. But what if they could? So it's a floating mat, and you put vegetation on it, and the roots hang down and act as a filter, and you anchor this where you're getting polluted inflow into like a stormwater pond or something. Or if you gang them up together, you can create a whole shoreline. And something on this scale helps the waves stop undercutting the bank, and it also provides huge habitat benefit, as well as aesthetics. Living shorelines, this is something you guys are big on in North Carolina, and we have just had a fairly recent regulation change about living shorelines. So if you wanted to stabilize your shoreline, you could put a bulkhead in, or you could put riprap in, or you could do a living shoreline. Okay, a lot of people don't know what living shorelines, they don't even know they exist, let alone what they are and how they work. And all of this has to be permitted. But the regulations changed recently because you could go and say, well, I want a bulkhead or I want riprap. Now you have to have a living shoreline unless you can prove otherwise that you need a different type of shoreline stabilization. So this happens to be pictures at the Hermitage over here. Oh, yeah, old pictures when they first put it in. Yeah, it's very different now. And this just, again, shows the use of core logs, backfilling, planting the grasses, because what this does is allows the shoreline to migrate, whereas a bulkhead and riprap are hard and it doesn't. And with sea level rise, we got to have the shorelines be able to migrate. So, and then this was just goose protection, because after you plant all that, you don't want them to come pull them out and eat them. Yep, yeah. All right, so again, I'm a science geek, so natural systems. Think about this. All right, natural system is the blue line here. So at 0, 0 on the axis, you get a rain event. And it rains and it rains and it rains and it rains and it takes a little while. And eventually you start getting some runoff, not a lot. And then eventually it kind of, tapers off. With development at 0, 0, it starts raining and your runoff starts immediately because it's an impervious surface. There's no chance for it to soak in. And we get high volume and high velocity, okay, that get these peaks, and then it all goes whooshing back into the natural waterways where we get blowout and scouring and bank undercutting and all of that stuff. So what we're trying to do with all of these things that we talk about relative to water management and landscape is get to this red line here. So again, 0, 0, the storm starts, and you don't get immediate runoff. It does happen a little sooner than a natural system, and it goes up and then plateaus over an extended period of time. So that's the slowing it down, the spreading it out, and eventually some of it, a little bit later, goes back into our natural waterways. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. All right, back to the stormwater pond. All right, this is the way that things were developed, designed and developed about 30 years ago. All of this subdivision here drains into these two stormwater ponds, which become liability issues and maintenance, the cost of maintenance on it and everything, if you have to pay HOA fees and stuff like that. This is what we're looking at now, distributed, disconnected types of smaller practices that are done closer to where the runoff starts. So you're dealing with a smaller volume of it, and it's spread out throughout that development. But the problem here is somebody moves away, somebody else moves in, and nobody tells the new homeowners that that's a rain garden. And they think it's a wet spot in the yard that looks weedy and unkempt and grows rats and snakes. So they're going to yank out all the plants, fill it in, and grow turf. Well, then there goes your stormwater management. So the biggest, it's not that we don't have the technology and the information, it's that information doesn't transfer well on a residential level. Right, so you can do a lot of things. Again, just a different graphic. You can put permeable pavers in the driveway, look at lawn alternatives, have a swale, harvest rainwater, put in a buffer, plant more tree canopy, compost for healthy soils. There's all kinds of things. Everybody can do something. All right, so I just real quick here, zipping down to the end. Here's our watersheds. Follow the star, right? That's Norfolk, right? These are Norfolk sub-watersheds. There's a little creek right there. That's my neighborhood, previous neighborhood. There's the old house over off of Cape View and Bayview. There's Google, thank you. So we've got, reasonably good tree canopy in the neighborhood. There's the tidal marsh, the canal behind my house. There's where the water goes. Everything that I did in that landscape impacts the water in the tidal marsh. The backyard drains directly into it. The front yard drains to the street, comes here and hangs a hard left into the storm drain right here that runs between my property and the neighbor's property into the tidal marsh. See the picture again, okay? So 8,300 square feet of property, about 3,000 square feet of impervious surface, so about 35%. Not good or bad, it just is. And then that's what comes into all of those landscape analysis tool that we talked about, but from a water quality perspective. So just different things. And this was not a master plan. All of these things that I talk about with this house happened over a 10-year period as something came up or I learned something new. So the downspout off of the garage here off of one corner goes into this bed. It goes into a perforated pipe. That bed gets changed out every year because I like to try different things. And I just, pull the annual plants out, pull the pipe up, knock the debris out, which adds organic matter, put it back in, replant something different. So that takes care of like part of the garage roof. The corner of the house comes down. This is what's called a treatment train. So you can use specific practices individually or you can put them together. in a train, like cars, boxcars on a train. So it comes into a splash block, which directs the water away from the foundation of the house into a swale that might only have been 10 feet long. And that swale dumps into a rain garden, which is right in front of the fence here and has one plant in it, one tree. And then when the rain garden fills up, it goes under the fence and into the vegetable garden behind it. So the water goes through several different steps of slowing it down, spreading it out, soaking it in, so that it hopefully, because before this downspout was connected through a pipe that went under the front yard, and you see how the little pipes come out in the curb, in the street, yeah. And then it just took a left turn and went out to the street, and then took a left turn and came right, because there's the division between my house and my neighbor's. That's where the storm drain runs to dump in the backyard. And once it's planted with pretty plants, you don't even know it's there. On the other side of the house, the downspout, this used to be a carport, and we pulled up all the messed up concrete and put down these concrete bricks, but we just laid them on sand, okay? Because this isn't something that's used heavily, and definitely not by vehicles anymore. So that gives the opportunity for it to soak in, so that less of it runs this direction and catches what's coming off of this concrete pad, and then running further on down the house. So this is the house, and then what would happen is the front would come down here and collect with the water that was here and just wash all this out, and it was like ankle deep muck. So I put in these little trenches to kind of terrace it, and then later learned that that's called a leveler spreader. So it slows the water down. Put in real chunky mulch to help prevent compaction, but also to allow it to dry out. Put in stepping stones, again, to prevent compaction. Found a plant that liked to grow there. That was one of those steppable plants, and there, problem solved. Green roofs, we don't do a lot with green roofs because it's something that generally has to be designed when the building is designed. It's really hard to retrofit a building with a green roof because of the weight load. But I told you I was a lazy gardener. Forgot to cut back the Confederate jasmine on the trellis here, and it grew up and over the shed because of all the pine straw dumping off of the tree here that my neighbor has. Well, hey, it's a green roof. It softens the rainfall, slows it down, absorbs a little bit of it. It's a happy accident, and less work for me. And then the bed edge extended out as this tree canopy line, the grass didn't do so well. So, and then, hey, I got free mulch from the pine tree. So it all worked out. Again, we saw the changes over time with that slide. Don't need to go through it again. My whole landscape was a long-term experiment on plant tolerance to brackish water inundation. So, like I said, I had anything that I was happy to grow in the backyard. This is my little buffer area of I had a daylily, peony, and bearded iris collection right there. So it's only like 2 feet wide. And then this is the buffer here with the brackish water plants, the Iva and Baccharis bushes, and then it goes down into the Spartina patens and Spartina alterniflora in the tidal marsh. So, in a rain shower or hurricane, the water comes up to the back of the buffer, which is fine. In a nor'easter, because water's pushed into the marsh, it comes up midway, because this is the patio at the back here. And then in Isabel, so I have to tell a story on myself, so you get a laugh here. So I was in a panic because we knew we were going to flood. So I dug up all my prized bearded iris, put them in grocery bags, labeled them with their names and everything, threw them in the shed. And of course, the shed flooded. So now I've got all these iris, these soggy bags that no longer have any names on them. So I just replanted and had an iris surprise landscape. But anyway, my yard had this type of a buffer. My neighbor to the left had a bulkhead. My neighbor to the right had riprap. My neighbor to the left, it washed out behind his bulkhead and damaged the bulkhead. He had to go through a permitting process. He had to have the bulkhead repaired. Then he had to pay to have fill hauled in to fill in, because he lost feet of property. My neighbor to the right, muskrats had gotten under the riprap and created a den, so they'd hollowed out an area. So water went in and basically washed away the soil that was under a tree. It was a giant hackberry tree. And the tree just went, not on her house, fortunately. I think she would have had a heart attack because she was like 90 years old. But anyway, so yeah, she had to deal with that issue. You look at the white caps out here, and I've got ripples. I did not have as much debris in my yard. I had basically no property damage in my yard. Now this was trashed. I had to prune everything back and regenerate it. But I did not have near the issues that my neighbors did because I had a green, buffer shoreline, and they did not.
They take advantage of seeing what this next.
No, they went right back with what they had. Right. Here's the resources, the 6 handouts that you've got. Again, the 6 most common practices for homeowners. Here's other tools that you can use. There is a stormwater, Chesapeake Stormwater Network. It's like a clearinghouse for information. So if stormwater is your thing, they've got all kinds of research studies. These are the people that do the Bubba Awards, the best urban BMP in the Bay, and go on there and look at the people that have won awards. We submitted something from here. We didn't win, but people are doing some really innovative, creative things, really positive things. There's your rain garden technical guide. Got it in your hot little hands. There is a Watershed Stewards Academy up out of Anne Arundel, Maryland. This is like Virginia Master Gardener Water Stewards on steroids. Seriously, they got it going on up there. But all of their resources are online for you to access. Posters, this rainscaping manual that talks about different BMPs and has great graphics, way better than my extension publications. So that's something that you might want to check out sometime. If you deal with brackish water, the Virginia Institute of Marine Science is your go-to. Everything that I talk about pretty much is freshwater situations. Brackish water, it is a whole different plant palette and a whole different way of looking at your landscape. But what they do is they tell you about the plants, and then they give you this chart and they color code which plants go where. Because it's not only how salty the water is, but the depth and frequency of inundation is very critical. So, and then the next question is, okay, I don't want to do any of this stuff. Who do I hire? So there is a Bay-wide program, Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professionals. These are people that have special training in design, installation, and maintenance of these stormwater practices. And all you do is go online to their website, and I think you can type in your zip code or something and find who in your area. Because that's specialized training. Your average landscaper is not going to know how to deal with these specialty features in your landscape. So, thank you. So I know we're at time. If anybody wants to walk around, fine, I'm willing to do that. If you'd rather just beat it, then what I did, one of your other handouts I included was a garden map. So we have 10 acres of gardens here that are open to the public free of charge. So you can come, we're 4-legged pet friendly and kid friendly anytime, or you can send people over here. But in those 10 acres, there are 28 different gardens. So we have the Sustainable Landscape Practices garden here. The rain garden is when you walk out the front, it's at the end of the greenhouse. The buffer garden looks like crap right now. We have had to let that go for a while. So, and then if you go down the road, you will go to the other gardens. There's a tree trail on the front lawn. And then there's 17 perennial theme gardens, 2 herb gardens, 3 perennial comparison gardens. There's a bayscape garden, which is our biggest native plant collection. Then there's a habitat garden for gardening for small wildlife. We have the utility line arboretum, which is small trees. Then we have the Tidewater Arboretum, which is our biggest woody collection. So I'll be prepared to go walking if anybody wants to, but otherwise, if you have to leave, please come back and see it sometime.